Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves in really one of the most pivotal military periods in modern history, the summer of 1940.
That's right.
This was a truly momentous season. I mean, the fate of an entire nation rested on the shoulders.
Absolutely. And if we trace the timeline, you see Hitler's seemingly invincible blitzkrieg had just swept across Europe, just stunning speed, overwhelming force.
Yeah, shock.
And it left Great Britain standing, utterly alone against this imminent threat of Operation Sea Lion. That was the planned German invasion across the Channel.
So our mission here, our deep dive, is to really understand the minute-by-minute reality of how that invasion was stopped.
Exactly. And we're doing it by focusing on the intense, specific experience of a single unit. RAF Fighter Squadron 501.
Right, 501 Squadron. We've chosen them as the lens for this because their story is, unique and, frankly, pretty brutal.
It really is. They were the only squadron continually operational in the Battle of Britain area from day one right through to the end.
And that's key, right? Day one to the end.
Right. And that was after they'd already been through the chaos of the Battle of France. So if you want to understand what high attrition warfare truly meant in 1940, you look at 501.
They suffered more losses, pilots killed or wounded, than any other single squadron during the whole battle.
Which just demands this fundamental question, doesn't it? About human endurance, about mental fortitude.
Yeah, how to even cope?
Their squadron motto was nil time. It translates simply to fear nothing.
Fear nothing.
Imagine trying to live up to that, sustaining that level of combat, that level of loss, week after week. It seems an almost impossible standard.
It certainly does. So let's unpack how this extraordinary group of often very young, often newly trained men, how they managed to live up to that. Let's start before the battle really kicked off over Britain. So 501 Squadron didn't just appear out of nowhere on May 10th, 1940. They had history, right? Roots going way back.
Oh, yeah. All the way back to 1929. Initially formed as a Special Reserve Squadron of the RAF.
Special Reserve. What did that mean practically?
Well, the origins are important because they really speak to Britain's early attempts to prepare for war, but, on a budget. Being a special reserve unit essentially meant they were paid to be on call. Later, they transitioned to the Auxiliary Air Force, the AAF.
Based at Filton in Gloucestershire.
That's the one.
Mm-hmm.
And the AAF, it was composed of weekend flyers, volunteers, often professionals, businessmen, training alongside the regular RAF units.
So a mix of professional and volunteer sort of laid the groundwork for expansion.
Precisely. But the real preparation for the manpower crisis that was coming started with the Volunteer Reserve Program, the VR.
Yeah.
That effort was absolutely critical.
It opened up flying to more people.
Exactly. It gave civilians the chance to learn to fly and, crucially, at the taxpayers' expense.
That's a huge deal.
Oh, the importance of that shift can't be overstated, especially in terms of social mobility and, military expansion. Before the VR, learning to fly was pretty much restricted, to those who could afford private lessons or had commissioned status.
Right. So the VR program kind of democratized access to the cockpit.
It really did. And we've got a perfect anecdote that illustrates this. A future 501 member, he was an engineering apprentice.
Okay.
He saw an advertisement basically saying they were starting reserve where you could fly in your spare time, keep your job.
Wow. For working class kids, that chance for free flight training must have been huge.
Massive incentive.
Yeah.
He became the fourth person accepted into that new VR program. That's how the RAF built the pool, the manpower pool, that would eventually staff Fighter Command in 1940.
And this expansion, it required adjustments, right? In rank structure, too.
Yeah, definitely. You see the pathway being created for enlisted men, sergeant pilots, to fly alongside commissioned officers.
Which wasn't the norm before.
Not really. One pilot recalled his CO, his commanding officer, confiding late in 1938 that the squadron was getting an establishment of 6 non-commissioned officer pilots. It meant training people based on aptitude, not just social stand. A radical change for the RAF at the time.
So, as Europe is plunging towards chaos, 501 formally convert from bombers to fighters December 1st, 1938.
Right on the cusp of things.
But even with all that prep, when the phony war finally ended, their experience level was still, alarmingly thin, wasn't it?
Very thin. That's when the reinforcements started to arrive. 501 initially had only about 12 pilots with any real wartime training. And even then, most of those guys had maybe 5 hours each on Hurricane.
5 hours? That's nothing.
Pretty much. Then Sergeant Pilot Ken Lee arrived. He was a veteran of the Voluntary Peacetime Squadron flying, and he came with others who brought maybe up to 100 hours of experience each.
Okay, that's a bit more.
Yeah, this injection of more experienced pilots was absolutely vital. They were adding years of accumulated proficiency just as the actual shooting was about to start.
And on May 10th, 1940, it started, in earnest. The Blitzkrieg hit Belgium, Holland, France. 501 deployed immediately to Bethenville.
Straight into the fire. But their first encounter with the grim realities of war, as they put it, actually came on the ground.
Not in the air.
No, it was chaotic. Shock. Pilot Officer Peter Hares saw one of 501's Bombay transport aircraft. It was carrying the rear party. It stalled just after takeoff, dropped from only 150 feet.
Oh, no.
Instantly broke its back. 3 members killed. Those were their first casualties. And it just immediately crystallized for everyone else that this wasn't training anymore.
A brutal start. And the air actions followed quickly.
Very quickly. May 12th, the squadron encountered the enemy for the first time, a Dornier 17 bomber. They went in, guns blazing.
Success.
Well, yes. But then they landed for breakfast, only to see the rear gunner from that same German plane sitting nearby, unharmed, just having a cup of coffee.
That must have been surreal.
A bizarre realization, yeah, that these were individuals, not just, imitation targets they practiced.
But the danger wasn't symbolic. It was real. Brutal.
Oh, absolutely. One pilot recalled the real thrill of finally seeing a formation of 35 enemy aircraft after months of mock targets.
I can imagine.
But the commitment required was immediate. There's an anecdote of a pilot attacking a bomber formation alone, no support. He scored 1 confirmed kill, another going down smoking.
Impressive. But what about him?
He got back to find his own Hurricane, riddled with 37 hits. He succeeded, but the cost was near fatal damage to his plane, out of the fight for a long time.
That just highlights the pace, doesn't it? The chaos in France. Allied forces completely surprised by the speed of the panzers.
Moving 40 miles in a single day sometimes. The RAF was fighting this desperate losing battle, trying to cover a collapsing army.
And 501's flying conditions mirrored that chaos.
Completely. No established defensive system, they didn't know the local area, no functioning radar, and crucially, no ground control.
No one telling them where to go.
No vectoring onto targets based on incoming information. They relied solely on patrolling in likely spots and hoped to intercept somebody. Just a war of opportunity, really. Not a cohesive system.
And this failure, this chaos, it must have deeply informed Dowding's thinking later on.
Oh, absolutely. He saw the futility of pouring resources into that kind of fight.
So 501 found themselves in this exhausting retreat, right? Providing rearguard action along the coast for the escaping troops. Not over Dunkirk itself, but nearby.
Exactly. Constantly engaged in the hinterland, trying to slow the German advance, buy time for the evacuation.
The physical toll must have been immense.
Unbelievable. Sources say pilots were flying multiple sorties a day for days straight, sometimes so utterly exhausted they had to be physically lifted out of their cockpits.
Oh.
France sought peace terms. 501 returned to England on May 18th, and Dowding, well, he was proven devastatingly right about the cost of the 261 Hurricanes sent to support the army.
How many came back?
Only 66.
66, that's staggering.
It is. 501 had suffered, definitely. But crucially, they were, as one pilot put it, just as ready to go. They'd learned the hard lessons of air combat firsthand. They were bloodied, but ready for the next round.
Okay, so 501 gets back to the relative safety of England. Battered, yeah, but not broke. And Dowding immediately turns his focus to the inevitable onslaught.
That's right. And this brings us to the strategic vision, the command structure, and importantly, the technological architecture that would define the Battle of Britain.
And you really have to look at the commanders, don't you? The contrast stark.
It really. On the German side, you've got Reich Marshal Hermann Goering, chief of the Luftwaffe, a brash World War I fighter ace.
Very confident.
Willfully confident. Convinced his magnificent modern Luftwaffe could just smash the RAF in a few weeks, clear the skies for Operation Sea Lion.
And then there's Dowding, Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding, Fighter Command HQ at Bentley Priory. Very different character.
Completely different. Tacit, focused, and utterly immovable in his core strategy.
Which was?
The absolute necessity of reserving his fighter assets for the defense of Britain. He flatly refused to keep feeding fighters into the futile campaign in France. He insisted he needed those 52 squadrons, already down to 36 by then, to defend the home island.
That foresight arguably saved the nation?
I think you could definitely make that case. He was the architect of what became known as the Dowding system, this complex control network that gave the RAF its decisive edge.
Right, the system. So he divided Britain into 4 fighter groups.
Yes, but the fate of the battle really hinged on just one, 11 Group, commanded by Air Commodore Keith Park.
That's the strategically vital area. Southeast England, approaches to London.
Exactly, and 501 was placed right in the thick of it, initially at Middle Wallop.
So Dowding wasn't just commanding pilots, he was commanding this whole integrated, almost automated air defense network. The first of its kind, really.
It truly was the system that won the battle. As much as the pilots, we really need to get into the detail on this network because it's the core technical differentiator.
Churchill's famous quote comes to mind, right? Going from the 20th century to the Stone Age.
That's the one. It perfectly captures the blend of revolutionary tech and, well, pretty rudimentary human effort, often within just a few miles.
So the cutting edge was chain home radar.
Yes, brand new technology, hastily developed, definitely imperfect, but absolutely vital. It could determine the location, the height, and the strength, roughly how many aircraft were in an enemy formation as they crossed the channel.
And that info went where?
Instantly transmitted to the filter room, usually underground at Bentley Priory, Fighter Command HQ. This was crucial. The filter room staff had to analyze and merge data from multiple, often conflicting radar stations.
Kind of cleaning up the signal.
Exactly. Removing interference, establishing a single, clear plot of the incoming raid. This filtered information then went up the chain to the group headquarters, like Keith Park's 11 Group.
And that's where the women-run operations rooms come in, the WVS.
Yes, absolutely vital. The Women's Voluntary Service members and other staff worked on these huge plotting tables, moving markers, representing the enemy formations, around with long rake based on the filtered data coming.
So the commanders could see it all unfold visually.
In real time. This physical tracking allowed the Air Commodore, like Park, to see the entire tactical picture develop. The efficiency gain was massive.
How so?
It meant the RAF avoided incredibly wasteful standing patrols, just flying around hoping to bump into the enemy, or blind search. They could dispatch their fighters precisely when and where they were needed, maximize their limited resources.
But the system had a major weak spot, didn't it? Radar only worked well over water.
That's right. The moment those German planes crossed the coast, the system instantly shifted to the observer corps. That's the Stone Age element, Churchill.
People with binoculars.
Pretty much. A volunteer civilian force tracking raiders using binoculars, simple sighting devices, and an aircraft recognition booklet. Serious. Their reports were phoned into Group HQ and plotted alongside the remaining radar. Surprisingly accurate, apparently, but slow and obviously limited, especially in bad weather.
So this whole network, from radar blips to observer corps phone calls, determined everything.
When to engage, where to engage, and critically, how many fighters to commit. It gave Dowding and Park that crucial 15 to 20 minute warning advance. Time to get squadrons airborne and positioned.
And they needed every advantage because they were facing overwhelming numbers initially.
Absolutely. July 1940, Fighter Command had maybe 609 single-engine fighters ready for action, the Luftwaffe, 809 Messerschmitt Bf-109, plus nearly 1,200 bombers and dive bombers.
Huge disparity.
Huge. And Goering's initial strategy before the main assault Adler attack involved probe. He started by targeting shipping convoys in the channel.
What convoys?
No reason. Try to close the channel to British shipping, and more importantly, force Dowding to commit his precious fighters, wear them down.
Did Dowding take the bait?
He resisted initially. He was determined not to attrite his force defending ship, but pressure from the Admiralty, the need to keep food and war materials flowing, eventually forced interceptions.
And this set the stage for those chaotic early fights, like the one 501 got involved in.
Exactly. 501 was moved to Gravesend, and we have this vivid description of Stuka's dive bombing over the harbor. 501 intercepting them, just as they nosed down to drop their bombs.
Must have been terrifying.
Utter chaos is how the pilot described it. 501 shooting at the Stukas shooting back, and the harbor defenses on the ground just shooting at everybody else.
Friendly fire incidents waiting to happen.
Almost certainly. A complete melee. It really underscores the lack of clear engagement lines at that point, the sheer concentration of firepower in one small space. This early period was vital, though, for the RAF to work out the kinks in the radar system and, importantly, learn to trust the WVS operators guiding them from the ground.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about the machines themselves. 501 flew the Hawker Hurricane. Now, the Spitfire always gets the glamour, the iconic.
Right? It does. The Spitfire is the poster child.
But the Hurricane was arguably the real workhorse, the backbone of the battle, especially early on.
Absolutely. It was essentially a monoplane version of an older biplane, the Hawker Fury, and its design philosophy was all about strength and ease of maintenance, utility over cutting-edge speed.
And that construction was key, wasn't it? Old-fashioned wood and fabric.
Over a metal tube framework, yes. Sounds outdated, but it made it incredibly resilient.
How so? What was the advantage?
Well, think about battle damage. If a Spitfire, with its stressed skin metal construction, got hit, it often required specialized labor, equipment, time-consuming repairs.
Right.
But the canvas structure of the Hurricane, ground crews could patch it relatively quickly, sometimes using simple materials, almost like patching a sail. It could take a good old battering, as the pilot said, and be back in the air sometimes within hours.
That durability, that fast turnaround, must have been essential when every single serviceable aircraft counted.
Absolutely crucial during that period of intense attrition. But that design did come with a tactical limitation.
Okay.
Hurricanes just weren't comfortable operating at the really high altitude, say above 25,000 feet, where the Bf-109s and the Spitfires really excelled.
So that defined their role?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The standard tactic became clear. Spitfires were usually vectored higher up. Their job was to engage the Messerschmitt 109 fighter escorts, the Hurricanes. They were generally sent in lower into the bombers.
Bomber destroyers.
Exactly. Using their strength and firepower against the enemy bomber formation. The good solid workhorse doing the dirty work.
Okay, so that's the Hurricane. Then you have the two thoroughbreds as Spitfire. Instantly recognizable, right? Those elliptical wings.
Beautiful design. An aerodynamic marvel, really ahead of its time. Though interestingly, the designer, Reginald Mitchell, reportedly hated the name.
Hated Spitfire? What?
He complained it was just the sort of bloody silly name they would choose.
Okay. And its main opponent, the Messerschmitt Bf-109.
A triumph of pragmatic German engineering. The designer, Willy Messerschmitt, didn't initially have a world-class engine like the British Rolls-Royce Merlin. The early Jumo engine was inferior.
So how did he compensate?
By designing the smallest, lightest, most aerodynamic airframe possible around that engine. The result was the Bf-109, sleek, fast, and by the start of the battle, its performance was probably marginally better than the Hurricane, and arguably as good as the Spitfire, especially in certain aspects like diving speed.
So you've got this mix in the air, the fast, high-flying Spitfire, the sleek, fast 109, and the robust, lower-flying Hurricane intercepting bomber. When they all met, what was the critical factor? Speed, altitude,
maneuverability, turning ability. That often decided things, especially between the fighters.
And that's where the Hurricane, despite being maybe a bit slower, had an edge over the 109.
Pilots consistently said it could outturn the 109s, no problem there. If a Hurricane pilot could pull into a tight turn inside a 109, they'd quickly end up right on its tail, turning the hunter into the hunted in seconds.
We have an account from Pilot Officer Gordon Parkin, right? A 501 pilot.
Yes, he described being jumped by a 109, saw it closing fast in his mirror while he was shooting at another one. Instantly executed a very, very tight turn to the left. The 109 pilot just couldn't follow that tight radius. Parkin gained separation, immediately averted disaster. That turning ability kept a lot of Hurricane pilots alive.
Especially against the 109's main weapon.
The vicious little cannon which fired through the propeller boss. A large caliber shell capable of bringing a fighter down with just one or two good hits. It was a serious threat.
And the Hurricane countered with?
Sheer volume of fire. 8 Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing.
8 guns. How long could they fire?
Not long. About 15 seconds of fire total. But the concentration was immense. All 8 guns were harmonized. Focused their stream of bullets through a circle about 1 meter across at 250 yards.
Devastating if you could hold the target steady.
Especially against the bombers they were primarily targeting. That sheer weight of fire could rip through airframe.
But hitting the right spot was crucial.
As powerful as that salvo was, hitting the pilot obviously ended the fight. Hitting the engine, well, many bombers had armored engines. They could take hits there. The sweet spot, pilots often said, was the radiator.
Why the radiator?
Hit that, puncture it, and the engine would rapidly overheat. The enemy aircraft would slow down, start trailing glycol. You could then close in, finish them off, or force them down.
So precision mattered, even with 8 guns. The danger wasn't just from the enemy, though, was it? Even landing could be hazardous.
Extreme, especially during the blackouts at night or dusk. Parkin, the same pilot who loved the Hurricane's turning ability, had a terrifying landing incident at Gravesend.
What happened?
Coming in at dusk, thought he was safe, saw the boundary lights go underneath him, relief. But then he saw 3 rows of barbed wire strung up across the landing path right in front of him. Defensive measure.
Oh, God.
He hit the wires, flipped over, ended up upside down. The cockpit started filling with earth because regulations required pilots to land with the canopy open for a faster exit in case of fire.
Did he get out?
He was knocked out. Woke up 48 hours later in the hospital. Just a sobering reminder, isn't it? How fragile the pilot supply was. A simple ground accident, a badly placed bit of wire, could take out a vital trained pilot just as effectively as a German cannon.
Okay, so moving into August, the Germans really escalate things, don't they? They shift tactics. It's not just about air superiority anymore. They start targeting the infrastructure itself.
Exactly. August 12th becomes a key date. They launch successful, carefully planned attacks, specifically targeting the chain home radar station along the coast.
Trying to blind the doubt.
Precisely. These attacks tore a huge 100-mile gap in Fighter Command's ability to see the incoming raids. This was the opening Goering wanted for his main air offensive, Adlertag Eagle Day, planned for the next day.
So, the critical question for Dowding must have been, how do you fight blind when your whole strategy relies on knowing where they're coming from?
It was a crisis point. The British response was, well, a mix of frantic repairs and some rather brilliant deception. While ground crews worked like mad to fix the damaged station, one key station, Ventnor on the Isle of Wight, remained down.
So that gap stayed open.
Physically, yes. But electronically, no. Instead of just accepting the loss, Ventnor's signal frequency was picked up and transmitted by a nearby intact station.
Ah, clever.
Very clever. This bit of technical trickery effectively fooled the Germans. They believed the radar chain was still significantly broken, but critical segments were actually still feeding data into the filter.
So Eagle Day, August 13th, goes ahead.
It does. It was meant to be the largest assault yet, but it was hampered by poor weather, which caused postponement order. Problem was, The order didn't reach all the Luftwaffe units.
Chaos.
Utter confusion, leading to sort of ragged mass attacks throughout the mid-afternoon rather than a single coordinated blow. But for the pilots of 501, the shock of the scale, even in this confused state, was immense.
How so?
Well, one pilot recalled being scrambled. They were told to look out for 200 Snapper, 200 enemy aircraft.
And how many Hurricanes do 501 send up?
12. Just 12 Hurricanes going up to face potentially 200 German planes. The odds were just staggering.
Incredible. But they could get airborne fast.
Amazingly fast. Their ground crews at Hockenge were incredibly efficient. They could get the entire squadron scrambled and airborne in just 1.5 minutes from the call. Those seconds brought them crucial altitude.
But once they were up there, meeting those huge formations, tactics must have broken down.
Completely. Pilots described it as no longer being cohesive team tactics. It was 360 degrees of action. Diving, turning, twisting through these massive formations.
Yeah.
It got, as one pilot said, very quickly to be every man for himself.
Just pure survival instinct kicking in.
Pretty much. You were completely isolated, focused entirely on that grim calculation. Can I shoot him down before he shoots me down?
And all this is happening while back on the ground, Lord Beaverbrook is churning out new planes.
Yes, Beaverbrook, heading the Ministry of Aircraft Production, performed miracles, ensuring a continuous supply of Hurricanes and Spitfire. Aircraft placement wasn't the critical bottleneck.
It was the pilots.
It was the pilots, experienced pilots that could be manufactured.
And this led to the single biggest crisis of the whole battle, right? The pilot supply drying up.
Absolutely. As attrition rates soared through August, Dowding was forced into this catastrophic choice. He had to cut the operational training time for new pilots.
From how long?
From a planned 6 months down to just 2 weeks.
2 weeks? That's insane.
It's the moment the terrible human cost of the whole strategy becomes starkly. You look at recruits like Bill Green. He was deployed immediately after this cut. Virtually no combat training.
What do you mean, virtually none?
He hadn't fired his guns in the air, hadn't properly used the radio, hadn't used oxygen systems. A training pilot, finding out Green was technically minded, basically told him the takeoff and landing speeds for the Hurricane and send him up solo.
Just like that.
Just like that. Green described himself, pretty accurately I think, as a self-starter. He flew the Hurricane for about an hour, practicing circuits around the airfield.
And then
he was flying live operations against the Luftwaffe the very next morning. No fighter training, no tactical awareness, nothing.
Thrown right into the deep end. What role did they give him?
The most dangerous one, the Green Sec. He was made Green 3. That meant he was the new recruit tasked with weaving constantly at the back of the formation.
Why weaving?
To protect the squadron's tail from surprise attacks from behind or below. It's a complex, demanding, high-G maneuver that requires constant vigilance, and he learned it entirely on the job, under fire.
The consequences must have been tragic.
They were immediate and brutal. The sources are painfully clear on them. The experienced pilots, the ones who'd survived France, they were carrying the full weight of the battle. Meanwhile, new recruits like Green were quite literally being shot out of the sky in seconds because they were just so ill-equipped.
And this attrition, this meat grinder, it hit 501 particularly hard on
August 8th, universally remembered as 501's most testing day. A German attack came through a gap in their rear cover, specifically targeting 2 of the new pilots who were practicing that weaving maneuver.
What was the result?
Devastating. 6 Hurricanes lost in that single engagement. 2 pilots killed, 3 more seriously injured. A massive blow to the squadron.
And Ken Lee, the experienced pilot who'd arrived France.
Yes, he was shot in the leg. The force of the cannon shell hitting the armor plate actually blew his leg up into the air, and the slipstream then physically blew him back into the cockpit.
Incredible. How did he get out?
He struggled, managed to regain some control, and eventually bailed out at a staggering 17,000 feet.
17,000. Did he open his parachute straight away?
No, and this is crucial. He deliberately free-falled for 7,000 feet before pulling the ripcord at 10,000.
Why? That sounds incredibly risky.
It was a desperate tactic, but necessary. A pilot descending slowly under a fully deployed parachute with a dogfight raging above was an incredibly vulnerable, easy target for enemy fighters. Free-falling drastically reduced the time he was exposed.
Wow. Survival at all costs. The German strategy shifted again after this late August.
Yes, Goering realized that despite the radar attacks, fighter command still existed. So he directed his attacks away from the coastal radar sites and onto the sector airfields themselves, the nerve centers of 11 Group, like Biggin Hill, Kenley, Horn.
And 501 saw this as the truly critical period.
They did. Because suddenly it wasn't just the pilots in danger. The ground crews, the operations room staff, the airfield infrastructure itself, they were all on the front line. Bombs were falling right where they lived and worked.
And the Germans were effective.
Devastatingly effective. Biggin Hill suffered a catastrophic low-level bombing and strafing attack, left 39 people dead, 26 injured on the ground. In those 2 weeks of airfield attacks, Fighter Command lost 200 more planes than it managed to shoot down.
That's unsustainable.
Completely. 6 out of the 7 vital sector airfields in 11 Group were critically damaged. By all accounts, Goering was dangerously close, maybe just days away, from achieving the air superiority needed to launch the invasion.
The pressure must have been unbelievable. We hear about Bill Green again, right? The self-starter.
Yes. Having somehow survived his initial baptism of fire, he was shot down again on August 29th.
What happened this time?
He saw a hole suddenly appear in his supposedly bulletproof windscreen. Then he was violently sucked out of the cockpit. He described this terrifying sensation of tumbling uncontrollably through the air, desperately trying to find the ripcord on his parachute harness.
Did he find?
He did. Felt that sickening jolt as the rigging lines ripped away from their temporary fasteners when the chute deployed.
And the most striking thing here
was the silence, the sudden, profound quietude after the chaos and violence. He said it hit him more than any noise he ever heard. That silence told him, just for a moment, that he was okay. The immediate battle was over for him.
That's powerful. And there's another story that really illustrates the sheer rate of attrition, isn't there, from Sergeant Pilot Tony Pickering?
Yeah, it's a visceral, chilling illustration. He was billeted in a room with 3 other pilots. Standard setup.
Okay.
Within days, one of them was shot down, didn't come back. The room now had 3 beds occupied. Then another was locked down to 2. Then only Pickering remained, sleeping alone in that room, until he himself was shot down the very next day. He survived, thankfully. But it just paints this picture of constant, graphic, daily loss, this awareness that it might be you next. That's what they had to overcome every single morning to climb back into those cockpits.
It really is remarkable, isn't it? Given those staggering losses, the fact that Fighter Command was losing pilots faster than they could possibly replace them, that somehow morale remained high.
It's almost counterintuitive. But the sources suggest it did. The young men of 501, they had to find ways to cope, to release that relentless pressure.
How did they do that? What did they do in their downtime? What little they had?
Well, they turned to dark humor, camaraderie, and grabbing any moment of normalcy they could. We hear about Pilot Officer Vivian Snell. Apparently, he was quite the pianist.
501's tame fat swaller, they called him.
That's the one. He and his flight commander would often sneak off base to visit local girls. They'd get back just before dawn, constantly running on fumes, pure fatigue.
And the pub closing times didn't help.
No. He mentioned being released from duty at 10 minutes to 10 at night, rushing to the local pub, only to have maybe 10 minutes to grab a pint before it closed sharp at 10 p.m. Just those little frustrations on top of everything else.
There's also that fascinating observation one pilot made, slightly inexplicable, about the Germans seeming to knock off early.
Yeah, it's a curious point. He noted that the last raids usually came over around 6 o'clock in the evening. He couldn't understand why the Germans didn't push harder, especially during those long summer evenings.
What was his theory?
His personal take was that the German Air Force played it very fair. He sort of surmised they wanted to get back to their bases in France, enjoy their evenings in the cafes and restaurants.
And therefore allowed the British pilot the same, a kind of unspoken agreement.
That was his feeling. Now, whether that was romanticizing it or whether it was genuinely some sort of unspoken etiquette or perhaps just a reflection of Goering's operational limitation, his focus on quick daylight blitzkrieg attack, we don't really know. But whatever the reason, that relative quiet in the evening definitely gave the desperately tired British pilots some much-needed respite.
Right. And regardless of German motives, Dowding's core strategy, the one he'd stuck to so rigidly, was actually working, wasn't it?
It was. His policy of preserving his fighters, forcing the German fighters into high-altitude escort roles where they burned fuel quickly, and crucially focusing his Hurricanes on the vulnerable bombers below it, was slowly but surely eating away at German aircraft numbers and, perhaps more importantly, their confidence.
And that huge number of sorties on August 30th must have been a shock to the Germans.
A massive shock. Fighter Command flew an astounding 1,000 sorties in a single day. It sent a clear signal to Goering. Despite the airfield attacks, despite the loss, the RAF was far from defeated. It was still a potent fighting.
So Goering's frustrated. The invasion window is closing as autumn approaches.
Exactly. And facing this resilience, frustrated, possibly under pressure from Hitler, after a lone German bomber mistakenly bombed central London earlier, Goering makes his biggest mistake, his most catastrophic strategic error of the entire battle.
What was it?
He switched targets again. On September 7th, he ordered the Luftwaffe to stop systematically bombing the fighter airfields and instead turn its full fury onto bombing London.
The Blitz begins.
The Blitz began. Partly an act of revenge, partly a desperate attempt to force the RAF into a final decisive battle over the capital, and partly based on the flawed intelligence assumption that Fighter Command was already on its last legs.
Nearly 1,000 German aircraft darkening the London skyline.
An unbelievable sight. About a third of them bombed, causing the city, particularly the docks and East End, to be ablaze, contemporary reports put it.
But tactically, this was the moment Dowding took the pressure off his air.
Precisely. By turning the bombers away from the battered sector stations of 11 Group, Goering gave Dowding's repair crews critical breathing time to recover, patch up runways, fix operations rooms.
And 501 was moved again, right into the thick of it, over London.
Immediately. moved to Kenley, just south of London, specifically to intercept these massive raids on the capital. This became their busiest phase of the entire battle. They flew over 600 operational hours in September alone.
And the accounts from this period show incredible close calls.
Absolutely hair-raising stuff. One pilot describing a head-on attack run against Dornier bombers, seeing the tracers whizzing past, having his oil sump shot away, somehow managing to land the aircraft while it was literally on fire.
Another pilot dodging cannon shells at point-blank range.
Yes, pulling a desperate, violent, steep turn just 100 or 150 yards away from a 109 that was firing its cannon right at him. Seeing the muzzle flash that close, pure reflex saving.
And this desperation, this intensity, it sometimes led to sheer aggression, didn't it? The Mackenzie ramming and...
Yes. Pilot Officer Ken Mackenzie, a 501. He was apparently champing at the bit for action. Really aggressive pilot. During a fight near Folkestone Harbor, he chased a Messerschmitt 109, but ran out of ammunition.
So the German was going to get away.
Looked like it, but Mackenzie refused to let him go. Instead of breaking off, he took the extraordinary, almost unbelievable step of using his own Hurricane as a weapon.
He deliberately rammed him.
He did. He carefully reduced his speed, maneuvered alongside the 109, and then brought his starboard wingtip down hard onto the Messerschmitt's port tail.
What happened?
The impact sheared 3.5 feet off Mackenzie's own wing, but it completely destroyed the 109's tail control. The enemy aircraft plunged into the channel.
And Mackenzie...
He somehow managed to wrestle his crippled Hurricane back towards land and belly landed it in a field. He lost 4 teeth in the crash landing, but he walked away. That level of determination ramming an enemy when you're out of bullets just shows the absolute refusal to lose that permeated the squadron.
Incredible story. And all this intensity, all these individual combats, they culminate on one specific day, September.
That's the day now enshrined as Battle of Britain Day. The Luftwaffe launched another massive daylight raid on London, but this time things were different.
How so?
Londoners looked up and saw not just scattered dogfights, but huge formations of RAF fighters, nearly 200 Hurricanes and Spitfires, thanks to Park having more time to assemble them, engaging the enemy en masse over the city. It was a visible, undeniable demonstration of strength.
And it convinced the Germans.
It seems to have been the final straw. It convinced the German High Command that Fighter Command, far from being defeated, was still a powerful, cohesive, and seemingly growing force. The losses they took that day were heavy, but the psychological impact was greater.
How did 501 do on that specific day?
They claimed 6 enemy aircraft destroyed, for the loss of 2 of their own Hurricane. A tough fight, but a net success.
So the sheer concentration of fighters the Germans met over London on September 15th finally broke their will.
It appears so. The Luftwaffe, fundamentally designed for short, sharp blitzkrieg campaigns supporting the army, just lacked a coherent strategy for any length of time, as one analysis puts it. They kept shifting targets, convoys, radar, airfields, London allowing the RAF, guided by the Dowding system, to adapt, recover, and survive.
And Fighter Command won simply by surviving, by remaining intact as a fight.
That's the crux of it. By maintaining the integrity of the Dowding system and preventing the Luftwaffe from gaining air superiority, they won the Battle of Britain. Operation Sea Lion, the invasion was postponed. First for a few weeks, then indefinite. Never happened.
And the pilots of Fighting 501, their contribution?
Phenomenal. They officially claimed 149 enemy aircraft destroyed between July and October. A huge tally. But as we've seen, it came at an enormous cost in pilots killed, wounded, and burned out. They truly earned their place among the few.
So we have this clear military victory achieved through brilliant new technology like radar, incredible human endurance from pilots and ground crews, and Dowding's unwavering, if sometimes controversial, strategic focus on attrition. What does it all mean for the men who actually achieved, particularly the commanders?
Well, this is where the story takes a rather dark political twist almost immediately after the victory confetti settles.
How so?
Dowding, the architect of the whole system, and Park, the commander of the crucial Levin Group, who implemented the strategy day to day. They had shown, by any objective measure, masterly command of their force. They secured this vital victory against overwhelming odds.
So they were celebrated as heroes, promoted.
Inexplicably, no. The reward for their efforts from the RAF High Command, the Air Ministry, was swift and calculated dismissal from their jobs almost immediately after the battle ended.
Dismissed? Why?
Dowding was effectively forced into retirement. Park was removed from command of the victorious 11 Group and shuffled off sideways to a training command post. A clear demotion in prestige and influence.
But that makes no sense. They won.
It boils down largely to internal RAF politics and intense intergroup rivalry. Air Vice Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory, who commanded 12 Group further north, was a huge proponent of the so-called big wing tactic.
The big wing?
Yeah, the idea of massing multiple squadrons together into one large formation before engaging the enemy. Lee Mallory and his supporters argued this offered greater offensive power.
And Park disagreed.
Park, commanding 11 Group, right on the front line, argued strongly against it. He knew from the data coming through the doubting system that they simply didn't have time to assemble these huge wings before the bombers reached their targets. He favored localized, quick deployment of smaller squadron units to intercept quickly, get something there fast.
So Dowding and Park were criticized for being too cautious.
Exactly. They were criticized for their conservative, attrition-focused tactics, even though those tactics ultimately worked. Their success was seemingly ignored or even resented by politicians and competing high-ranking officers like Lee Mallory, who favored the theoretically more aggressive, but often slower and less practical, big wing approach.
Which raises a really important final question for you, the listener, to think about. We spent this time seeing how absolutely crucial the right technology, that radar chain, and the right carefully considered strategy, Dowding's focus on preserving his fighters, were to winning this existential battle. So what does it say about the inherent politics, the rivalries within large command structures, that the two individuals most responsible for that hard-won victory, Dowding and Park, were immediately punished, sidelined, essentially scapegoated by their own superiors?
It really highlights that success in the field, even success on the scale of literally saving the nation from invasion, doesn't always translate into professional security or recognition within the hierarchy. Sometimes internal politics trumps battlefield victory.
So the first thing that really jumped out is structural. Trying to cover almost 1,000,000 years chronologically creates this relentless pace. It's exhausting for the listener, and you lose those crucial connections between different times.
Yeah, it moves incredibly fast.
Right? You're hopping from early human activity, maybe 450,000 years back, then boom, Roman invasion, then the Vikings, straight through to the Stuarts in the 1600s. There's no pause, no synthesis.
And that structure, while, incredibly thorough, puts a huge strain on the narrative. Because it is so vast, big events don't land with the weight they should.
Exactly. You see it with really pivotal moments. Take the Norman Conquest, 1066. I mean, that fundamentally reshaped English society. The feudal system, stripping land from the old elite.
A massive upheaval.
Huge. But here it almost feels like just another date on a timeline, a bullet point. And when those defining moments are treated sequentially like that, rather than as dramatic turning points, their significance gets diluted for the audience. They lose the emotional impact.
The chronology ends up working against the story itself.
So the suggestion here is maybe think about reorganizing larger chunks around major themes, or around those big structural shifts, instead of just marching decade by decade, century by century.
Right.
That gives you room for those needed pauses, lets you dive deeper into eras that really fundamentally changed things.
Okay, but I wonder, does shifting away from chronology risk making it feel less like a definitive history and maybe more like, a collection of essays? The author obviously put a lot of value on that timeline.
That's a fair point.
How do you group things thematically without losing the listener, without making it confusing?
You keep the timeline as the main spine, the backbook, but you allow for these thematic loops or detours. The idea is to give people time to see recurring patterns.
Okay.
For instance, instead of just finishing one century and starting the next, maybe you could group moments of serious internal conflict together, pull them into one thematic section.
Ah, I see. So you could look at the tension between rulers and the people?
Exactly.
So you could cluster something like the anarchy, that civil war back in the 1100s.
1138, yeah.
Right, alongside the Peasants' Revolt a couple of centuries later, 1381. And then connect that historical thread right up to the English Civil War in 1642.
Precisely. So the listener isn't just getting 3 separate dates dropped on them.
No, they're seeing the long build-up, that continuous pressure cooker of sort of political struggle in Britain.
It shows the continuity of that pressure, rather than just treating these things as isolated events popping up randomly in history.
And you could do that earlier too, right? Take that massive societal shift, the move from hunting and gathering to farming.
Agriculture, yeah, around 4100 BC. Huge.
Let that stand as its own landmark moment. Instead of rushing straight into Neolithic tech, you could dedicate a whole section to just how the landscape itself changed.
Focus on the scale.
Yeah, focus on the sheer effort involved. Those mass flint tools clearing land for the first time for crops like barley and emmer. Give that foundational change room to actually breathe and land with the reader.
That structural choice makes the argument much stronger. You're showing why an era matters, not just when it happened.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. better pacing.
That shift in pacing is absolutely critical. Now, building on that, challenge the risk of things feeling like a checklist that often happens when the narrative forgets to anchor itself in, tangible human detail. Which brings us neatly to critique number 2.
Right. Specificity.
Exactly. The material actually has incredible specific historical detail. They're often just buried or glossed over, which really flattens the potential engagement.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
You see these fantastic little nuggets, like mentioning the discovery of those rare wooden spears in Essex, 450,000 years old.
Wow.
Or the idea that Neanderthals apparently made new hand axes when they arrived somewhere, rather than lugging old ones around. That feels like real historical detective work. It's fascinating.
That is a huge strength, finding those concrete specifics. But yeah, this is where we saw a major missed opportunity. Too often, the writing snaps right back to very abstract, high-level summary language just after dropping one of these vivid details,
undercutting its own impact.
Totally. You see it when discussing, say, the fortified hill forts and the Hallstatt chiefs. Really interesting stuff on Bronze Age market strategy. Only to follow it up with something quite generic like, the Iron Age was vital to the advancement of the human race. The narrative just stalls when it shifts from that specific reality to that kind of broad summary statement.
And it seems to happen more often later on, in the more complex periods like the Stuart and Georgian eras. There are fascinating glimpses of cultural shifts, but they're so fleeting.
It's the classic show don't tell issue, isn't it? It's telling us something was important, rather than showing us why it felt important to the people actually living through it.
Precisely. So the suggestion is really to prioritize anchoring the narrative in those tangible, human, memorable detail. Let the specifics, life, death, everyday struggles, drive the story forward, rather than just relying on abstract summaries of trends.
Right.
We need to linger in those human moments and use them to illustrate the bigger economic or political point being made.
Couldn't agree more. We need to feel the reality of those past lives, like when talking about the Stuarts, instead of just saying there was widespread poverty.
Which is true, but abstract.
Right. Linger on the weird specifics of daily life. You mentioned the bit about women being banned from coffee houses but allowed in tea rooms. That single detail says volumes about changing social norms, gender segregation.
It paints a picture instant. And what about the physical reality? We saw some fascinating mentions of common deadly illness, that terrifying griping in the guts.
Oh, yeah.
Crippling stomach pain, likely from bad water, parasites, awful hygiene. When you emphasize that level of visceral suffering, the constant threat of infection, you ground the era's challenges, the poverty, the sanitation, the high mortality, much more effectively than just saying, workers were poor or medicine was basic.
Absolutely. And building on that need for visceral detail, look at the Georgian era's approach to crime. There's a chance to really shock the listener before getting into the reform.
Yeah?
Instead of just summarizing the need for prison reform, emphasize the chilling specifics of the bloody code. What was it? 200 crimes?
Something like that, yeah, including petty stuff like poaching or vandalism.
All potentially punishable by death. And don't just state it. Lean into the almost theatrical nature of public hangings.
The spectacle.
Exactly. That 3-mile cart ride through the streets, the crowds throwing things, the weird detail about releasing white doves just before the execution.
Use those moments of real shock, that social theater, to grab the audience. That kind of detail provides the essential emotional context before you talk about the later efforts towards legal and prison reform.
You have to feel the brutality for the reform to really mean anything.
That contrast, the shocking detail, then the systemic effort to change it. That's great narrative pacing, right?
Yeah. If that specific to general approach can be applied more consistently across all the eras, this material will just come alive.
Agreed. Okay, so final point. Let's talk about the conclusion. We've covered restructuring for pacing and theme and sharpening the detail. Now we need to make sure the ending pulls it all together effectively.
Right, the so what factor.
The document's conclusion right now feels, a bit broad. It relies on generalizations about culture and language, mostly literature, film, the global spread of English, especially after the World Wars.
Which is fine, but
it misses the chance to synthesize the major recurring themes that the document itself has so painstakingly tracked. Sovereignty, economics, that centralization versus decentralization tension.
that feels like the core missed opportunity at the end. The listener has just processed centuries of really complex history. But the conclusion pivots mainly to cultural exports. Yet, as you said, the material itself shows centuries of struggle over political power. Magna Carta, parliament rising, civil wars. It tracks huge economic shifts from Bronze Age market strategies right up to the Industrial Revolution's impact.
And critically, that constant back and forth with Europe, right? Involvement versus isolation, Romans, Vikings, Normans, the EU, Brexit, it's all in there.
These are the real historical through lines. The conclusion shouldn't suddenly swerve into culture. It needs to weave those specific historical threads together. Make a final, synthesized argument about what makes the UK's history distinctive.
So the suggestion is basically synthesize that historical data into a final point about the recurring tension at the heart of the UK story. Maybe focus on that cyclical conflict centralization, like the monarchy or empire.
London-centric power.
Right. Versus the regional or democratic forces pushing back parliament, local movements, devolution, independence. That feels like the pattern that endured.
And the evidence is all there in the preceding chapters, ready to be pulled together. Like for concrete examples, you could connect those really early economic strategies.
Yeah?
Like the Bronze Age founders having a sophisticated market strategy to control bronze value. Connect that directly to the huge economic shifts after World War II.
Like the nationalization of big industry, coal, aviation.
Exactly. And then contrast that with the massive privatization drive under Thatcher later on. And you can even bring it right up to today's energy crisis, concerns about scarcity in 2023.
Show that economic strategy isn't just modern history. It's a continuous tension, shaping the state from way back when trade got serious.
And politically, too. Instead of just saying the empire declined, reference the specific historical arc of resistance. Connect the dots.
Okay, how?
Link the Celts resisting the Romans way back when to the long struggle for Irish independence, the IRA, and right through to the modern political outcomes like Brexit in 2016.
Show it's a long game.
Show that long historical arc. Demonstrate that these independence movements, these shifts in global alignment, they aren't just sudden modern things. They're culminations of centuries of push and pull between the center and the edges. That kind of analysis is way more satisfying for someone who's waded through all this history
than just ending on, say, English literature exports.
Exactly.
Okay, so to wrap up, an incredibly detailed document here, immense work, but the sheer scope is currently overshadowing the narrative potential.
Right. So first step, tackle that pacing, try implementing thematic groupings, give those foundational moments like the Norman Conquest or the shift to agriculture, the narrative space and weight they deserve, rather than getting lost in the strict chronology.
Second, anchor the whole thing using those fantastic, specific historical details you've already found. Make the human reality visceral, the Stuart hygiene, the Georgian justice system. Use those specifics to illustrate the broader trends. Don't just summarize the trends themselves.
Show, don't just tell. And finally, sharpen up that conclusion. Don't shy away from synthesizing those big, recurring themes, the tensions around sovereignty, economics, regional versus central power. That's the payoff.
Absolutely. Implementing these changes, focusing on structure, specificity, and synthesis will really elevate this from an exhaustive historical survey to a genuinely compelling narrative.
It's got amazing potential.
It really does. So we strongly encourage you to work on these structural and stylistic points, and please do submit the revised version back to us here at The Critique.
We'd be very interested to see how it evolves.
I think the sheer density right at the start, the early Anglo-Saxon and Norman bits, it risks overwhelming the reader. All those names, the short reigns, it kind of blurs the focus before we get to the landscape shifting reign.
Yeah, I saw that too. The commitment to listing everyone is, it's thorough, but it does create this narrative drag early on.
Right.
You see it with all those short reign kings one after another. Aethelwulf, Aethelbald, Edwig, Adred. It asks a lot of the listener.
Exact. Like Aethelbald's reign. It's short, unpopular. You mentioned the marriage to a stepmother, which is, okay, interesting trivia.
Right.
But does it feel crucial to the monarchy's overall story right then? The weakness is that this intense detail slows things down. I mean, right before we even get to someone pivotal like Alfred the Great.
Absolutely. So the suggestion here is really about applying an editorial filter, right up front.
Okay.
We think you should consolidate those less formative, shorter reigns, maybe group them into thematic summaries. Focus on the big picture, the threats they faced, the overall conditions, rather than every single name. And then Save the really rich description, the deep narrative focus, for the monarchs who genuinely changed the game. You know? Territorially, legally, dynastically.
Okay, I get the need for focus, but won't grouping them too much risk, flattening the Anglo-Saxon period, losing some of that early texture?
That's a fair point. It's not about erasing them, more like recontextualizing. So, for instance, Egbert's immediate successors, Aethelwulf, Aethelbald, Aethelbert.
Yeah?
Yeah?
Instead of mini-bios, you could use them collectively to really hammer home the escalating Viking thread. Frame it as this relentless pressure building up.
Ah, leading into Aethelred and Alfred?
Exactly. It makes Alfred's arrival feel more dramatic, more necessary, not just the next king on the list.
That does strengthen that whole section, yeah. Makes Alfred's impact clearer.
And you can apply the same thinking later on. The period between Athelstan, the unifier, and Canute the Great.
Right. Edmund, Edred, Eadwig, Edgar. Yeah, those ones. Instead of detailing each reign, maybe focus the editorial lens on the fragility of that unified England Athelstan had built.
Okay.
You actually mentioned Edmund spent his whole reign just trying to hold his half-brother's kingdom together against the Danes. That's your theme right there.
So lean into that instability?
Lean right into it. Show how that inherent weakness, that constant pressure, eventually led to the House of Wessex losing control in 1016. It shifts the focus from just biography to the bigger historical forces at play.
Okay, I like that. It tackles the density issue and gives the early part a stronger narrative drive. So, what about the core promise mentioned earlier, how the monarchy eventually forfeited power?
Good transition, because while all the events are there, that central theme, the gradual transfer of power, could be, well, much sharper, much more explicit.
How so?
Well, right now, the big moments where royal power gets chipped away, Magna Carta, Parliament's rise, the Civil War, they tend to be presented as results of specific kings messing up.
Like John being unpopular, Henry III being incompetent, Charles I being absolutists, that kind of thing.
Precisely. And the weakness there is that it risks making history look like just a series of crises caused by individual failures.
Uh-huh.
It sort of obscures the real story, which is this long, slow, centuries-long trend of power shifting first to the barons, then Parliament. It wasn't just cyclical chaos. It was like an incremental constitutional development.
Okay, so the suggestion is make those links explicit.
Yes. Use transitions. Use little analytical moments to consciously connect events across eras back to that central theme of power moving away from the crown. Frame these conflicts not just as flare-ups, but as actual stages in developing checks and balances.
Got it. Can you give an example?
Sure. Take Magna Carta. After the First Barons' War, when Henry III agrees to abide by it, that's huge. Emphasize that this set a precedent. The crown agreeing to be bound by common law. It wasn't just a reaction to John. It became a permanent constraint, limiting royal power moving forward.
Okay, so it establishes the theme early. Magna Carta isn't just a document from 1215. It's the first real, lasting crack in absolute rule.
Exactly. And then carry that thread forward when you talk about Simon de Montfort's Parliament after the Second Barons' War.
1265, yeah.
Don't just mention it. Highlight how revolutionary it was. 2 knights from each shire, 2 burgesses from each borough. Emphasize this was a whole new system, a practical mechanism shifting power away from just the king.
That makes sense. And it also connects to things like succession crises, right?
How do you mean?
Well, often when there wasn't a clear heir, like William Adelin drowning, or later Elizabeth I having no children, the monarch had to rely more on nobles or parliament.
Ah, yes, absolutely. That forced reliance inevitably meant giving up some power or leverage.
So those crises actually accelerated the trend. That's another thread you could pull on.
That's a great point. Adds another layer to that power shift narrative. Okay, so we've talked structure, theme. What about sheer engagement? Making it gripping.
Yes, that was the other thing. Sometimes these incredibly dramatic moments, high-stakes events, they kind of fly by in the summary. I think slowing down, really using descriptive language for a few key scenes could massively boost engagement, make those turning points stick in the reader's mind.
Yeah, the weakness is definitely that some really compelling, almost cinematic moments get summarized too quickly. We race past the juicy bits.
Exactly. Like Empress Matilda during the Anarchy. Her escapes are amazing. Pretending to be a corpse, being lowered from Oxford Castle.
In the snow, and white.
Right. And it's like, boom, paragraph over. So the suggestion is pick maybe 3 or 4 of these really pivotal, dramatic scenes.
Okay.
and just expand them. Let the reader see it, feel the tension, before you move on to the historical consequence. Give those moments room to breathe.
Okay, so Matilda's escape from Oxford. That's a perfect candidate.
Definitely.
Really lean into the detail. The white clothes against the snow and ice, rappelling down the castle wall in, 1141? Paint that picture. It shows her desperation and cunning, way better than just saying she escaped.
Yeah, that's a much stronger image. What else?
Well, Richard the Lionheart's death is another one. You mentioned the chronicler's line, "The lion by the ant was slain."
Yes.
Use that. Use it as a sharp turning point. Contrast the myth, the great warrior king, with the slightly absurd reality of his death, dying from an infection from a crossbow bolt while fighting over basically scrap metal in France.
The irony, an absent king's random end?
Exactly. It underlines the reality behind the legend. And then, of course, the big one, Bosworth Field.
The end of the Plantagenets, Richard III.
Absolutely. You need to slow right down there. Elaborate on the betrayal, Richard's isolation,
Northumberland, holding back.
Northumberland not moving, Stanley switching sides, and then Richard's final desperate charge, straight at Henry Tudor.
Through the mud.
Through the mud, aiming for Henry himself. That final act, maybe even the my horse, cry, it humanizes the end of a dynasty, the chaos of that battle, in a way a straightforward account just can't capture.
Okay, these are really strong, actionable points. So just to recap, the main takeaways.
Yeah, let's summarize.
First, streamline that dense early chronology. Group the minor figures thematically, especially around the Viking threat, to give Alfred and others more impact.
Right. Second, really sharpen that core theme of power forfeiture. Explicitly link the big constitutional milestones, Magna Carta, Parliament, show them as cumulative steps, not just reactions to bad kings. And maybe weave in those succession crises too.
And third, boost engagement by picking a few truly pivotal, dramatic scenes. Matilda's escape, Richard I's death, Bosworth Field, and slow down. Use descriptive language, let the reader really experience those moments.
Exactly. Those three adjustments, we think, will take this from a really comprehensive history to something truly immersive and analytically powerful.
Excellent. These suggestions should provide a clear path forward.
Absolutely. And once you've had a chance to work through them, we genuinely love to see the revised version. Feel free to send it back for another look.
Great.
We're here to cut through the noise, get you truly well informed with those surprising facts and insights you might miss elsewhere. We're taking on something huge, a real saga over 1,000 years of the British monarchy. We're talking from warring Anglo-Saxon kingdoms right up to the Windsors today. It's packed with drama, power struggles, more twists than you'd believe. Our mission really is to give you a shortcut, a way to grasp the sheer resilience, the adaptability of this institution. We've gone through a ton of sources, the stuff you shared, articles, research, and we're pulling out the key nuggets. You know, the lineage, the legends, the legacy that shaped not just a family, but the whole nation.
It is fascinating, isn't it, when you look across that vast timeline. You see this institution starting with almost absolute power, and it just has to keep adapting constantly through bloody succession wars, global conquests, betrayals, huge pronouncements that changed everything, and all that leads eventually to the unique constitutional monarchy we see today. It's an incredible story of evolution, really.
Absolutely. And you're going to hear stories that honestly sound wilder than fiction. Maybe some insights that make you rethink royal power altogether.
Yeah.
We need to go right back, way back before England was even really a thing. Okay, so our story properly kicks off, let's say, around 771 AD. Forget unified England for now. Picture the British Isles more like a mosaic, often violent, lots of independent Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, Mercia, Northumbria, Wessex. And into this pretty turbulent world, a Saxon prince named Egbert III was born in Wessex.
Yes, and Egbert's early life is, crucial, because it really shaped his ambition, his understanding of power. He had strong claims to the Wessex throne, but an early attempt failed. He was forced into exile over a decade in Francia. But this wasn't just sitting around, it was an education. He spent time at Charlemagne's court. Think about that, the most powerful ruler in Western Europe. Imagine the lessons he learned there. Administration, military strategy, how to build a state. So when he came back in 802 AD, he didn't just reclaim Wessex. He started applying all that knowledge immediately.
So he wasn't just content ruling Wessex, he aimed bigger.
Oh, much bigger. Egbert was relentless. He brought Kent, Essex, Sussex under West, pushed into Cornwall. Even Northumbria submitted. He wasn't just conquering, he was consolidating, laying the administrative groundwork. That's how he earned the title Bretwalda, basically wide ruler or Britain ruler.
Yeah.
His policy was clear. Expansion, centralization. He really planted the seed for a unified...
Okay, so just as this idea of Anglo-Saxon unity is starting to kind of take shape, this new terrifying threat arrives, completely disrupts everything. The Danes.
Right. The Viking Age hits hard. The Danish invasions really ramp up around 842 AD. Then comes the Great Heathen Army in 865. These weren't just raids anymore. This was full-scale invasion, conquest, settlement. They sacked major places like Winchester. Anglo-Saxon rule was genuinely on the brink of collapse. And that's when Alfred the Great...
Alfred, the one who famously burned the cakes, right?
The very same. Legend has it, he was so wrapped up in planning his counterattack, hiding out in the Somerset Marsh, that he let these cakes burn. It sort of tells you something about his focus, doesn't it? From that low point, he regrew, launched a surprise attack, and smashed the Danish army at the Battle of Edington. But it wasn't just military, it was politically smart too. He didn't wipe them out. He forced their king, Guthrum, to convert to Christianity and agree to divide...
The Danelaw. I remember that name from school. Well, what did it actually mean? It's real significant.
The Danelaw, yeah. Established after Edington, it formally divided England, Saxon rule in the west, Danish rule in the pragmatic, allowed both cultures. But the impact was huge and lasted for 8. It meant different legal customs, even language differences that shaped regions for centuries. But Alfred knew military wins weren't enough. He started this massive societal rebuild, built fortified towns, burhs for defense and trade, basically rebuilt the kingdom's infrastructure. And he championed education, built schools, got Latin texts translated into English, laid the intellectual foundation.
So much more than just a warrior, a nation built, setting the blueprint. And his grandson, Athelstan, he took that blueprint and, finished the job.
Took the throne in 924 AD. Historians often call him the first real king of England. He completed what Alfred started. He conquered Northumbria, took the Viking capital York, pushed Danish influence right out, even up into Scotland. His big moment was the Battle of Brunanburh in 937. A massive, bloody battle. Anglo-Saxons against this huge alliance, Norse, Scots, Celts. He won decisively, and that victory effectively united all the Anglo-Saxon king, created the...
That's incredible, really, from scattered tribes always fighting to a unified kingdom in just a few centuries. You kind of take England for granted now, but back then, revolutionary. Set the stage for everything else. Okay, let's jump forward. Dramatic. To 1066, that year is just burned into history, isn't it? Maybe the single biggest turning point for the English crown. After the Anglo-Saxons finally create this unified kingdom, bam, another massive succession crisis.
Yeah, Edward the Confessor dies without a clear heir. Chaos. Harold Godwinson, a powerful English earl, gets crowned quickly. But across the channel, William, Duke of Normandy, he believes Edward promised him the throne. So he gets an invasion fleet together, lands in Sussex, September 1066. Harold, meanwhile, has just marched his army all the way north to beat another Viking invasion. Then he has to force march south again to face exhausted. That exhaustion definitely played a part in the Battle of Hastings. October 14th, tense epic stuff. Harold gets killed famously, maybe an arrow in the eye. Legend says his body was so mangled they threw it in the sea. William then marches on London, crushes any resistance, gets crowned William the Conqueror on Christmas Day.
And his rule wasn't exactly gentle, was it? He didn't just conquer, he completely remade England.
Oh, absolutely. Swift, ruthless consolidation. He took huge amounts of land from the English nobles, gave it to his Norman followers, and to enforce it all, an incredible building program, about 500 Motte and Bailey castles in just 20 years.
Motte and Bailey. This is the quick ones, right? Not the big stone castles yet.
Exactly. Quick to build, effective control. A wooden tower on an earthen mound, and the moat with a fenced yard, the bailey. Perfect for pinning down territory fast. He also ordered the harrying of the north. Brutal campaign against rebels, left places like Yorkshire devastated for generations. And for administration, he commissioned the Domesday Book.
The Domesday Book?
Yeah.
Right, tell us more about that. Why is it so important historically?
Well, the Domesday Book, finished in 1086, was basically England's first national census. William sent officials everywhere to record everything. Land, value, people, livestock, even plows. Its main purpose was tax. Figure out what he owned, what he could tax. But for us, it's an unbelievable snapshot of 11th century England, just invaluable detail about medieval life, and you can see the huge changes the Norman Conquest brought.
So William sets up this incredibly centralized, absolute monarch. But that kind of power, history shows it usually breeds resistance, right? It wasn't too long before the barons started pushing back, leading to this huge showdown later on.
Indeed. It definitely set the stage. Fast forward about 150 years to King John, often called Lackland, partly on popularity, partly because he lost nearly all the English lands in France. His rule was problematic. Heavy taxes, unfair justice, even got excommunicated by the Pope for a bit. His barons, many descended from those Normans, they'd had enough. 1215, they corner him at Runnymede, force him to sign Magna Carta.
Magna Carta. Such a revered document now. But what was its real impact back then versus its long-term legacy?
That's a really good question. Initially, it was basically a power grab by the barons, protecting their own feudal rights against a king pushing too hard. Less about universal freedom, more about specific aristocratic complaints. But what's truly fascinating, the real insight here, is how this document, born from a feudal squabble, kind of accidentally set this huge precedent. The idea that even the king isn't absent, that the king is subject to the law. That tiny spark, it eventually fuels movements for constitutional rights centuries later, impacting democracies everywhere. It wasn't a great constitution on day one, but it was the seed.
That's a profound unintended consequence. That first formal check, saying the king's not above the law, really laid the groundwork for so much that followed, still felt today. Now, that initial check on royal power exactly bring last. The centuries after Magna Carta were full. England faced things like the Black Death, completely reshaped society. The 100 Years' War with France, which actually helped clear English identity. And all the while, this slow grind continued. Power shift, crown, evolving parliament, which eventually blew up the road. Brutal. So after decades, Henry VIII would provide it, but his son,
Henry VII, the first Tudor. He was a very shrewd won the throne at Bosworth Field, ended the Wars of the Roses, solidified his claim by marrying Elizabeth of York, uniting the two warring houses, Lancaster and York. Smart move. He strongly believed in royal absolutism, divine right of king, ruling without answering to anyone. Nobles, church, parliament. He thought he could raise taxes, make big decisions with minimal input. He's good at it. Rebuilt the royal finances, established a stable government after all that chaos.
And then comes his son, Henry VIII. Never meant to be king. His older brother Arthur died, right? Thrusting Henry into the role. And this is where personal ambition just completely reshapes England's identity.
Absolutely. Being the spare, not the heir, definitely shaped Henry. He was Renaissance prince, smart, athletic, passionate, inherited a stable kingdom, full treasury. But his obsession, his desperate need for a male heir, that became the catalyst for this massive shift. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, Arthur's widow, only gave him a daughter, Mary, after 24 years. He needed a legitimate son to secure the Tudor dynasty. So he asked the Pope for an annulment. Pope refused. And Henry, well, he made a monumental.
The decision being, of course, to just break away from the Roman Catholic Church entirely.
Precise. Through Parliament, culminating in the Acts of Supremacy in 1534, Henry declared himself supreme head and cut ties with Rome. Now, this wasn't really about theology initially, it was political. Dynastic ambition. Then came the dissolution of the monasteries. Huge wealth flowed to the crown, and dissent ruthlessly crushed. Sir Thomas More, his own former chancellor, executed for refusing to accept Henry's supremacy. This act just irrevocably changed England's religion, society, politics, everything.
And after a shock like that, stability was hardly guaranteed. His kids' reigns were, well, a religious roller coaster seems like an understatement.
Oh, completely. Henry had thrown everything up in the air. His son, Edward VI, was young, sickly. Under his Protestant regents, reforms continued strongly. Then he dies young. Brief, tragic, 9-day reign of Lady Jane Grey, another Protestant, then overthrown by Bloody Mary, Henry's Catholic daughter. She violently reversed the reforms, persecuted Protestants, hundreds She also married Philip II of Spain, which didn't help her popularity, and lost Calais, England's last bit of...
What a mess. But then came Elizabeth I, a woman navigating this incredibly volatile world, who really forged England's global identity.
Elizabeth I, Mary's Protestant half. She was a political genius, understood the need for compromise. She established the Church of England, Protestant doctrine, but kept many Catholic traditions. This middle way helped manage those deep religions. But her defining moment, 1588, the Spanish Armada. Philip II of Spain, staunch Catholic, sent this huge fleet over 150 ships, aiming to conquer England, restore Catholicism.
And England, pretty small then, somehow defeated this massive...
Yeah, through a mix of things. Brilliant English naval tactics, faster ships, more maneuverable. Sir Francis Drake's genius using fire ships to break the Armada's crescent formation. And then this huge storm, the Protestant wind, they called it, finished the job, scattering the Spanish fleet. The victory was massive, not just military, psychological. Solidified England's Protestant identity, made Elizabeth a legend. And crucially, it marked England's arrival as a major naval power. Directly fueled future colonial ambitions, its rise on the world stage.
It's just incredible. A king wants a son, and from that, England's entire religious path, its international standing gets completely altered. The ripple effects are just immense. Right, so the Tudors left a powerful centralized crown, but the Stuarts who came next, they quickly found out that power was seriously contested, leading to unimaginable conflict and fundamentally changing the relationship between monarch and people forever.
Exactly. The first Stuart, James I, was already King James VI of Scotland, so his accession in 1603 united the crowns of England and Scotland. One monarch, two separate parliaments, though. James was a huge believer in the divine right of kings, inheriting that Tudor abs. He truly thought his authority came direct from God, which immediately put him at odds with Parliament, which was becoming much more assertive, seeing itself as a partner in ruling. And religious tensions were high, too. Think of the Gunpowder Plot, 1605. Catholic plot to blow up Parliament, kill the king, just fueled more anti-Catholic. Catholic.
And the real explosion, the clash that broke the kingdom, came with his son, Charles I. He seemed determined to push royal power even further, didn't he?
Charles I was just as committed to absolute rule as his father, maybe even more so. He kept trying to raise taxes without Parliament's okay. Parliament pushed back with the Petition of Right in 1628, basically saying, "King, respect the law, no taxes without our consent." Charles's response: dissolve Parliament for 11 years. Ruled completely on his own. During that time, he brought in unpopular taxes like ship money. Traditionally, just coastal towns paid it. He made inland counties pay too. And he enforced religious uniformity via Archbishop Laud, alienated Puritans. Many emigrated to America. It was a ticking time bomb.
And that bomb, predictably, went off. Exploded into the English Civil War. For the first time, a king facing his own people on the battlefield. Revolutionary stuff.
The Civil War started 1642. Royalist cavaliers versus Parliament's Roundheads, largely Puritan middle class. It saw Oliver Cromwell rise up. Military genius turned Parliament's forces into the disciplined, motivated new model army. Their big wins at Marston Moor and Naseby crushed the king's armies. Parliament became more radical, led to the unthinkable, the trial and then the execution of Charles III, 1649. Shock. England became a commonwealth, a republic, a massive shift in power dynamics.
Wow. No more king. A republic. But how long does that actually last? And who was really running things?
Didn't last long, really, just over a decade. Cromwell, the guy who won the war, eventually got fed up with Parliament, dissolved it, became Lord Protector in 1653. Basically a military dictator. A king in all but name. His rule was very strict, puritanical. Banned horse racing, theater, even canceled Christmas. He brought stability, military success, sure. But his autocratic style, the Puritan, it became unpopular. Many people, even former Parliament supporters, started wanting the monarchy back.
And so the monarchy came back. Surprisingly quickly and with popular support. How did that happen?
Yeah. The Commonwealth just didn't have broad legitimacy in the end. After Cromwell died, his son Richard wasn't up to the job. So in 1660, Charles II, the executed king's son, was invited back from the Restoration. Huge public rejoicing. A return to Merry England. Reversed lots of those strict Puritan laws. But that experienced civil war. No king profoundly changed. The final big shift came with the Glorious Revolution of 1688. Charles II's brother, James II, was Catholic. His pro-Catholic policies, his attempts to assert royal power, massive opposition. Parliament feared a Catholic dynasty, so they took this radical step. Invited the Protestant William and Mary of Orange, James's daughter and son-in-law from Holland throne. James II fled, relatively bloodless.
So Parliament literally invited the next monarchs. That's incredible. Ruling by invitation, not just birthright. Completely turned centuries of tradition on its head.
It really does. And the result was the Bill of Rights in 1689. Landmark stuff. Permanently limited royal power. Banned Catholics from the throne forever. Crucially, cemented Parliament's supremacy crown. It laid out basic rights for citizens, established a limited monarchy. The monarch reigns, but doesn't rule absolute. This idea of a contract between ruler and ruled was revolutionary. Power wasn't from God anymore, it was from parliamentary consent.
That period really is a massive turning point, isn't it? The crown's authority fundamentally shift. Divine right out, parliamentary contract in. This is basically the birth of the constitutional monarchy we recognize today. Symbolic head of state, but real political power with elected people. Okay, so Parliament's now firmly in the driver's seat. The monarchy's role has to evolve again. But it wasn't just about domestic power, was it? It was also about defining a new nation.
That's right. Queen Anne, James II's other daughter, she oversaw another huge change. The Act of Union in 1707 officially formed Great Britain, united the Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of Scotland into one single sovereign symbolized by the Union Jack flag. A massive step towards a unified British identity. The monarch now ruling over this bigger entity.
Speaking of change,
yeah.
Imagine having a king who couldn't even speak. That's just extraordinary for a monarch.
It really was. After Anne died without an heir, the throne passed to the German House of Hanover, mainly because the Bill of Rights banned Catholics. George III arrived in 1740. Spoke little English, seemed pretty uninterested in actually governing Britain, but this detachment, oddly enough, had a huge unintended consequence. It led directly to the rise of the Prime Minister and the cabinet we know today. George III basically delegated power to trusted politicians. Robert Walpole, a brilliant financier, emerged as Britain's first de facto Prime Minister, especially after he handled the South Sea Bubble.
The South Sea Bubble.
Okay.
What was that, and why was Walpole's handling so key?
It was this huge financial crash in 1720. A speculative mania around a trading company went bust, ruined loads of investors, threatened the whole economy. Walpole with his financial skill and ability to restore confidence, basically saved the day. His success cemented his position as the government's main guy, the Crown's problem solver, solidified the PM's. The Bank of England also stepped in more, managing the Crown's finances directly, further distancing the monarch from day-to-day.
So from these rather detached Hanoverians, we leap forward to the iconic Queen Victoria. Overseeing this vast empire where the sun never set, she became the symbol of an entire age.
Queen Victoria's reign, 63 years, 1837 to 1901, truly it coincided with the absolute peak of the British. At its height, controlling something like 35.5 million, the biggest empire ever. It was also the age of the Industrial Revolution, changing society completely. Huge cultural and scientific leap. Dickens, Darwin, Bell. Victoria herself, especially after Prince Albert died, became the symbol of duty, morality. Her 9 kids married into royal families across Europe, hence the grandmother. Her influence subtly shaped diplomacy for decades. Though her long mourning for Albert did cause a bit of a dip in popularity, a brief rise in Republican feeling, she definitely recovered to become this enduring figure.
Then the 20th century arrives. Unimaginable challenges. 2 world wars, the empire dismantling. How on earth did the monarchy adapt and survive all that?
This was maybe greatest test of Edward VII. He started modern, more public diplomacy. His son reigned that dropped the German Gotha, really under, and he supported self-government. Then came Edward Wallace, American massive crisis, led shy, stammering brother Albert, but he was incredibly beloved in London. After rap shows how the role.
And finally, that brings us right up to Elizabeth II, a monarch who truly defined the modern era. Record-breaking reign, navigating huge changes with, well, remarkable steady.
Elizabeth II's 70-year reign, 1952 to 2022, it was just a masterclass in modernization. She embraced technology, televised coronation, Christmas messages, traveled more widely than any head of state ever, fostered ties globally, first British monarch, communist China. She managed to keep the monarchy relevant in the 21st century despite huge challenges, personal children, the Annus Horribilis in 92, maintained incredible popularity right through, passed peacefully in 2022 at 96, a constant presence in a world that changed so much around.
Which brings us right to today. King Charles III, the oldest person ever crowned King of Britain, inheriting a kingdom facing, well, immense flux, politically, socially.
Charles III has this long history of activism, doesn't he? Climate change, sustainable farming, architecture, often ahead of the curve. But his public image has been complex, polarizing at times, especially after the divorce from Diana. If you look at the bigger picture, he inherits a UK post-Brexit facing economic challenges, growing calls for reform. He seems to understand, maybe more than any monarch before him, that the monarchy has to keep changing, adapting. It has to prove its value, its relevance to survive in this modern world.
Wow, what a journey. From uniting warring tribes to a global empire, then its peaceful shift into a commonwealth. The British monarchy story is just incredible. Transformation, resilience, adaptation. It's this amazing saga of power, personality, pure historical chance, shaping not just one family, but a global legacy.
And running through it all, that central theme, power shift, from the absolute monarch through parliament, eventually towards the people, which raises that big question for today, doesn't it? In a world changing so fast, where tradition often clashes with modernity, can a 1,000-year-old institution like this keep finding its relevance? Can it adapt to modern expectations, but still hold on to its history?
King Charles III has definitely signaled he knows the crown needs to evolve, but the challenges facing him are immense, maybe more than any monarch can send. What role really will the crown play in Britain's future? And could he possibly be, as some people speculate, the last king of Great Britain in its current form? We're tackling something pretty dramatic. The idea of the 1066, Hastings, all that. It wasn't really an ending, Frank.
Not at all. More like a really chaotic, messy beginning of a whole new chapter.
Exactly. A story packed with ambition, conquest, and some truly wild family feuds that basically reshape the entire island.
And that's our mission today, isn't it? To go beyond just William the Conqueror's famous victory.
Right. We want to explore those next, almost 90 years. Often overlooked, but absolutely critical.
Spanning William's 3 sons and even a grandson, it's a period that fundamentally changed.
We're talking language, law, who owned the land, even England's sense of itself, all while these Norman rulers are juggling England and their territories across the Channel.
And navigating these intense family rivalries, we've dug into some fantastic sources.
We have things like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, giving that contemporary feel, detailed monastic histories.
And even visual stuff like the Bayeux Tapestry, vivid, even if, a bit biased sometimes.
Definitely biased. But they give us these amazing nuggets, insights into the personalities and the moments that forged this new Anglo-Norman world. So let's kick things off with the main man himself.
William the Conqueror.
Yeah. In his birth, back in Normandy around 1027 or 1028, it was, complicated.
Illegitimate, yeah. Known for years as William the Bastard. His father was Robert, Duke of Normandy. His mother, her her background.
Not exactly the easiest start in life for a future king.
And Normandy itself, it's worth remembering, was relatively new, founded by the Viking Rollo just back in the...
Right, so William's Norse family, if you might call them, they'd actually Gallicized pretty quick, adopted French ways.
Exactly, creating this unique Norman culture. A real mix, Germanic, Roman, Norse influence. And that potent mix was about to hit hard.
His early life, though, really tough. His father dies on pilgrimage when William's only, 7 or 8?
Yeah. 1035. Plunges his childhood into chaos. Constant danger. Plots again.
But he learned fast. By his mid-teens, he's asserting himself, winning battle.
Like capturing Falaise, and that crucial win against his cousin Guy of Burgundy at Valais Dunes in 1047 shows his ruthlessness early on.
A brutal ascent, no doubt.
Absolutely. Then he consolidates power. Makes his half-brother Odo the Bishop of Bayeux. Very useful.
And that marriage to Matilda of Flanders in 1050, that was huge, wasn't it?
Massive diplomatic move. And they had 9 kids, including 2 future English kings. He just kept expanding his power in northern France, beating the French king, annexing Maine by 1063. He was a major player long before 1066.
So the English connection. The Anglo-Saxon royals, Edward the Confessor included, had been exiled in Normandy for ages.
Right, they knew William's court well.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Edward the Confessor's promise. The Normans talked about it, sure, but it's actually in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle before 1066.
That's the key bit, isn't it? Suggests it was a real claim, known at the time, not just something cooked up after the invasion.
Makes his claim seem much stronger, more authentic.
Then you add Harold Godwinson's oath to William in 1064, famously shown on the Bayeux Tapestry. So when Edward dies in January 1066, and Harold gets himself crowned by the
The Council of Wise Men, yeah.
Well, that just lights the fuse.
And the invasion itself, the logistics are mind-boggling. Thousands of war horses.
Upwards of 3,000, yeah. And he needed new types of ships, these Byzantine-designed horse transport, to get them across the channel.
It shows how warfare was changing in medieval Europe, does projecting that kind of mounted power.
It really does. It extended a ruler's reach massively.
And then luck, or maybe fate, plays a hand. Harold Hardrada invades the north.
With Harold Godwinson's own brother, Tostig, no less.
So Harold has to race his army north, wins this incredible victory at Stamford Bridge.
But it leaves him completely exposed in the south. His army's exhausted.
And just days later, William lands near Pevensey and immediately starts burning and looting.
Pure psychological warfare. Laying waste to Sussex, making a brutal statement.
Which brings us to Hastings. October 14th, 1066. Fought near battle, not actually in Hastings itself.
Harold's men, tired, holding the high ground. A classic shield wall.
But William had cavalry, archers, and those infamous feigned retreats.
Tricky tactic, designed to lure the English shield wall into breaking formation, then the Norman knights could charge in. Coupled with constant arrow fire, it eventually worked. Harold died.
And we have to remember, of course, history is written by the victor. Our best accounts are Norman.
Very true. So after Hastings, William doesn't just march on London. He's captures Dover, Canterbury, Winchester first.
The English tried putting up Edgar Atheling as a sort of puppet king.
Futile, really. William gets crowned on Christmas Day, 1066 in Westminster Abbey. Pretty chaotic coronation, apparently. Soldiers setting fires outside.
And he becomes William the Conqueror. So what does this all mean for England? It wasn't just a regime change, was it?
Oh no, it was radical. As one historian put it, no country in Europe has undergone so radical a change in so short a time. A complete overturning of society.
Starting with land, right? The Doomsday Book.
Absolutely. Commission 1085-86. It wasn't just a survey. It was William saying, all this land is ultimately mine. A fundamental shift in land.
Based on royal decree, not old Anglo-Saxon right.
Exactly. And it showed just how total the change was. Only a couple of major Anglo-Saxon landowners left. Thousands of Norman places.
So you're by all those new stone castles popping up everywhere. Symbols of power.
Like those held by Robert of Milan, William de Warenne, William Fitzosborne. Then there's language. Anglo-Norman, this old French dialect, becomes the language of power.
Of the court, the administration. It starts blending with Old English, eventually giving us modern English.
Bilingualism became a necessity if you wanted to get anywhere.
And the law changes too.
Law French in the courts. A more centralized legal system developed, seeds of common law. And surprisingly, a social change too, slavery gradually fades out.
Really, the Doomsday Book shows fewer slaves.
Yeah, a significant drop by the 12th century. Seems like there was quite a bit of manumission after the conquest, though the reasons are complex.
Church reform too.
Big. William centralizes the English church, brings in guys like Lanfranc as Archbishop of Canterbury, though they tried to keep some independence from the Pope.
And propaganda. Lots of it.
Oh, yeah. William of Jumièges, William of Poitiers, writing very favorable. Battle Abbey built right where Harold supposedly felt penance, and a victory monument rolled into one.
And the Bayeux Tapestry you mentioned.
A masterpiece of political spin, justifying the invasion, celebrating the win, highly sophisticated stuff.
Interestingly, though, despite conquering England, William spent most of his time back in Normandy.
About 4/5 of it, yeah. He saw Normandy as the heartland. He was constantly fighting in France, Maine, King Philip III.
But England wasn't quiet either. Revolts up north, Hereward the Wake in the Fen.
Which led to the horrific harrying of the north. Scorched earth tactic, caused famine, massive population drops, maybe up to 75% in some areas. Brutal.
And he starts building the Tower of London, the White Tower, around 1078.
A massive stone statement right in London, basically saying, don't mess with me. Pure intimidation.
There's even a theory he planned to invade Ireland.
The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle mentions it. Maybe to stop rebels getting support from the Welsh or Scots. It's debated, but possible.
Yeah, one of his last big acts commissioning that doom.
1085-86. An incredible administrative, unprecedented survey of land shows him as more than just a warrior.
A modernizing administrator.
Definitely. But his end in 1087 was almost darkly comic, writing acts.
And that funeral in Chaotic doesn't cover it. A peasant interrupts, claiming the land was stolen from it.
And then his body, well, it didn't quite fit the tomb they'd made. They had to force it in, apparently causing some damage. A rather undignified end.
And that decision he made on his deathbed, splitting England and Normandy.
Giving Normandy to Robert, England to William Rufus, and just cash to Henry.
It just guaranteed conflict, didn't it? Set the stage for all the family drama to come.
Precise. Which brings us neatly William.
The second son, King of England, born 1060 in Normandy. Quite the character by all accounts.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Flamboyant is the word. Stocky build, ruddy face, striking red or blonde hair, hence Rufus.
Loved fashion, apparently. Short tunics, pointy shoes.
Yeah, there's that great story about him rejecting cheap shoes, wanted ones, costing a mark of silver. Witty, but apparently stuttered when angry.
And the church really didn't like him.
Hated him, more like it. Saw him as a heretic, possibly an atheist. His lifestyle, his attitude towards religion. He famously said something like, damn him who believes that.
And there were rumors about his personal life, weren't there? Talk of homosexuality.
There was. Chroniclers mentioned his unorthodox taste. He never married, had no kids, legitimate or otherwise, which was really unusual for a king back then.
So that fueled the church's hostility.
Undoubtedly made him seem morally suspect in their eyes, gave them more ammunition.
His early path was meant to be the church under Lionheart.
Yeah, but he was entirely unsuitable. Switched to military training pretty quick, became second in line when his older brother Richard died hunting.
And he was his father's favorite, right? Went on campaigns with the Conqueror.
Definitely. England 1071, Scotland 1072. He was loyal, unlike Robert.
Ah, yes, the family dynamics. That story about the urination prank on Robert.
Shows the tensions early on, doesn't it? But Rufus, stuck by his father, fought against Robert at Gerberoy in 1079. That loyalty got Robert disinherited, and Rufus named heir to England.
So the Conqueror dies. Rufus makes his move for England fast.
Very fast. Lanfranc backs him. He gets crowned September 1087. Uses his father's treasure to buy loyalty.
But faced rebellions almost immediately. Odo of Bayeux.
His own half-uncle, yeah. Led a revolt in 1088 to put Robert on the throne. Even Henry joined in briefly. Rufus crushed it quickly, forgave Moat, but Odo was exiled for...
He wasn't always so forgiving, though, was he? That plot in 1095.
Robert de Mowbray's plot, yeah. Rufus came down hard, blinding castration for some conspirators, showed his ruthless streak when pushed.
And he was constantly scrapping with Robert over Normandy?
Always bribing Robert's vassals, undermining him. Led to the Peace of Rouen in 1091, where they actually ganged up on Henry for a bit.
Then Robert goes on crusade in 1096. Big opportunity for Rufus.
Huge. Rufus basically buys Normandy off him for 3 years, 10,000 miles. Lets Rufus spend way more time there fighting the French king, campaigning in Maine, even pushing into Scotland after King Malcolm.
Which leads us to his, well, very sudden end, August 2nd, 1100, hunting in the New...
Shot through the heart with an arrow. Officially an accident blamed on Walter Tyrrell, but the circumstances are...
Accident? Assassination? What do you...
The accounts conflict. Tyrrell fled immediately, the body was just abandoned, the funeral was rushed, no ceremony. And then Henry
moves incredibly fast, races to Winchester, grabs the treasury, gets himself crowned king 3 days later.
It all looks very convenient for Henry. That fuels those murder theories, or at least rank opportunism.
So Rufus, a mixed legacy, effective ruler, loyal son.
But controversial. His personality, his fights with the church, that mysterious death, leaves a lot of questions.
And leaves the throne open for the unlikely brother, Henry III.
The youngest son, born in England around 1068, part Norse, part Norman.
His chances of being king must have seemed tiny at first.
Extremely unlikely, yeah. 4 sons ahead of him. But he was the educated one, could read and write Latin, suppose, earned that nickname Beauclerk, fine scholar.
Though maybe that was played up.
Possibly exaggerated, yeah. But he was clearly intelligent, knighted in 1086.
He was there when his father died, right?
Right.
Got the money while his brothers got the lands.
Correct. Rufus quickly took Henry's English land, so Henry initially started with Robert and Norman, managed to get control of the continental.
Played his brothers off again.
Very skillful, benefited hugely from their fighting, and Robert's generally poor rule in Normandy. So when Rufus died in 11, bang.
He seized the moment. Winchester, the treasury, crowned within 3 days. Lightning.
Absolutely. Then he moved to legitimize things. Married Matilda of Scotland in November 11.
Smart move. Daughter of Malcolm III, links him to the old Anglo-Saxon line, secures the north.
And the Treaty of Alton in 1101 with Robert. Robert accepts Henry as king for cash, and they agree to be each other's heirs if one dies without a son, which becomes ironic later.
But Henry was more than just power hungry, wasn't he? He was a real modernizer.
Definitely. Look at his policy of promoting new men, guys from lower ranks like Geoffrey de Clinton, Ralph Bassett.
Replacing the old Norman nobility?
Undermining them? Orderic Vitalis said he pulled down many great men and raised up common. Caused resentment, sure, but built loyalty directly to him. A shift in how government worked.
And he developed royal administration, traveling justices.
Yeah, traveling with lawyers, dispensing justice, a precursor to circuit court. And taxation, he massively developed the system, collected into the exchequer at Winchester.
The pipe rolls start then, for systematic tax records in medieval Europe.
Amazing records. The first surviving one is from 1130. Shows real administrative sophistication. He also tackled the church over the investiture
Who gets to appoint bishops, basically.
Right. He exiled Archbishop Anselm for a while, but eventually reached the Concordat of London in 1107, a compromise between king and pope that actually set a model for elsewhere in Europe.
He was active on the borders too. Wales, Scotland.
Pushed into Wales, setting up Norman lordships like Pembroke, strengthened the border marches, kept Scotland close through marriage alliances.
And that zoo at Woodstock.
Yeah, around 1110, England's first known zoo, lions, camels, tigers, probably from Crusader trade connections, a fascinating glimpse of his court.
But all his planning, his careful administration, it all came crashing down, didn't it?
Tragic. The White Ship disaster. November 25th, 11. Henry had few legitimate children, remember? Just Matilda and William.
And dozens of illegitimate kids, but they couldn't inherit.
Exactly. So William Atheling was the heir, the only male heir. And he's on this ship, the White Ship, sailing from Normandy.
Hits a rock off Barfleur. Sinks.
Almost everyone drowned. William Atheling, 2 of Henry's illegitimate children, loads of young nobles, just one survivor, a butcher apparently, completely destroyed Henry,
leaving only his daughter Matilda.
His only legitimate heir. And England wasn't ready for a queen. Plus, she was married first to the Holy Roman Emperor, then later to Geoffrey of Anjou, not popular choice of Norman barons.
But Henry was determined, made his lords swear oaths to support her.
Forced them to, including his nephew Stephen. Henry even remarried, hoping for another son, to Adeliza of Louvain in 1121, but no children.
The threat from Robert's son, William Clito, faded when he died.
Yes, Clito died in 1120, removing that rival claim. And Matilda did eventually have sons, Geoffrey, Henry and Geoff, born 1133, 1104. That strengthened her claim.
But Henry himself died soon after, 1135, the lampreys story.
That's the tradition. Died from eating a surfeit of lampreys, maybe just food poisoning. He was 67, buried at Reading Abbey.
But despite all his efforts forcing oath, it wasn't enough.
Not nearly enough. His death unleashed chaos. England and Normandy plunged straight into civil war, the anarchy.
Which brings us to Stephen, grandson of the Conqueror via his daughter Adela.
Right. Born in Blois, France, mid-1090. His older brother was apparently intellectually challenged, so Stephen was rose.
And he was a favorite of Henry I, wasn't he? Got lots of land.
Hugely favored. Henry gave him the honor of Lancaster, big chunks of land, and Stephen was actually on the White Ship.
No way.
Yeah, but apparently felt seasick or something, decided to get off and take the next one. Incredible luck, saved his life, put him in line for the throne.
And his marriage to Matilda Boulogne.
Made him Count of Boulogne in 1125. Gave him land and power on both sides of the channel. Very strategic.
So Henry Search dies December 1135. Stephen hears first.
He's in Boulogne, gets the news fast. Matilda and Geoffrey are further south in Anjou, and they're not popular anyway. Stephen doesn't hesitate.
Crosses the channel, secures London, gets support there.
And the Archbishop of Canterbury just ignores his oath to Matilda and crowns Stephen on December 22nd, 1135. They even spread a story that Henry changed his mind about Matilda on his deathbed.
Pretty thin justification.
Very thin. And war wasn't far behind. Stephen spends the first few years trying to hold things together, fighting off Scots, Welsh revolts.
Ceded Carlisle to the Scots King David I.
Had to. But the real civil war, the era, kicks off in 1130. Stephen versus Matilda.
And Matilda had powerful backers, Robert of Gloucester.
Her half-brother, yeah. Ranulph of Chester, too. England basically split in two. Matilda holds the west and north, based in Bristol. Stephen holds the south and east, London, Oxford.
And it was just chaos.
Total chaos, breakdown of government, constant violence, devastation. Chronicles talk about farming stopping, economy collapsing, castles destroyed, towns sacked, a nightmare.
Did the warfare change things, like castle building?
Definitely. People stopped relying on the old wooden Motte and Bailey castles. They needed stronger stone fortresses to withstand sieges. Constant warfare drove innovation.
The tide turned against Stephen for a while, didn't it? Battle of Lincoln?
February 1141. Stephen was actually captured there by Robert of Gloucester and Ranulph of Chester, imprisoned in Bristol.
So Matilda takes over, declared Lady of the Ink.
Briefly. But she seems to have mishandled it. Arrogant, apparently. London refused to accept her. And meanwhile, her husband, Geoffrey of Anjou, takes over Normandy in 1144.
But Stephen's wife, Matilda Boulogne, fought back.
She was formidable, rallied Stephen's supporters, including his brother Bishop Henry of Winchester. They managed to capture Robert of Gloucester at the Rout of Winchester later in 1141.
Prisoner swap.
Exactly. Stephen was freed in November 1141. Had himself crowned again, just to make the point. He even got really sick in 1142, but recovered.
So it settled into a stalemate, mid-1140s.
Pretty much. Back and forth fighting, no one winning decisively. The focus starts shifting to the next generation. Stephen's son Eustace versus Matilda's son Henry Fitzempress.
Robert of Gloucester dying in 1147 must have hurt Matilda's cause in England.
Weakened her support, yes. And the Second Crusade drew some fighters away for her, too.
So how did it finally end? Henry Fitzempress gets more involved.
Matilda's son, yeah. He starts leading campaigns in the early 1150s. But the fascinating thing is the Treaty of Wallingford, or Winchester, in 1153.
What happened?
Basically, the barons on both sides were just exhausted, fed up with the war. They pressured Stephen and Henry to make a...
And Stephen agreed.
He was around 60 by then, probably tired. He agreed that Henry Fitzempress would succeed him. Stephen would remain king for his lifetime, but Henry was heir. Stephen disinherited his own son.
Wow. What about his son Eustace?
Conveniently, Eustace died suddenly in 11, removed the main obstacle to the deal. Stephen himself died just over a year later, October 4, from a stomach buried at Fab.
Henry Fitzempress becomes King Henry II, start of the Angevin order finally restored.
Much needed. Poor Stephen often gets the blame for the anarchy, but maybe he was more a symbol.
You mean the underlying problem was the succession crisis, Henry?
Exactly. Henry I's failure to leave a clear, accepted male heir created the Power Vacuum. Stephen stepped into it, but the conditions for civil war were already there. It was a systemic weak waiting to break.
So looking back over this whole period, nearly a century, from William's conquest, brutal but transformative.
Through all the infighting between his sons, the chaos under Stephen, it was a real crucible, wasn't it? Forging this new Anglo-Norman identity.
Absolutely. And the choices made, the battles fought by these kings, they laid the groundwork for so much that came later.
English language, law, government structure, England's relation, it all has roots right here in this turbulent time. They really shaped.
It leaves you with a big question, though, doesn't it? Given all the brutality, the instability culminating in the anarchy, was unifying England and Normandy under rulers like William and eventually Henry II actually a good thing in the long run for him?
Or did it just swap one kind of chaos, maybe the older Viking era kind, for a more centralized but just as brutal Norman power struggle? Did it actually postpone real...
And what other paths might England have taken? What alternatives were lost in all that bloodshed and
Have you ever found yourself wondering about the really dramatic origins of England's most powerful royal family? How these fierce struggles for power didn't just shape a nation, but, well, an entire empire. Well, today we're taking you on a deep dive into one of history's truly... tumultuous periods. We're talking 1141 to 12...
It's quite a span.
Yeah, an era defined by civil war, massive empire building, and legal documents that honestly still echo today. We'll explore the lives of four really pivotal Empress Matilda, II, Richard the Lionheart, and of course...
It's a fascinating journey, definitely, and we've gathered detailed historical accounts, medieval chronicles, and even some archaeological insights to try and cut through the noise for you. Our mission really is to guide you through this incredibly intricate web of Norman, Scottish, Anglo-Saxon lineages, European power politics, and some truly intense family feuds. Right. Feuds that shaped what we now call the Angevin Empire. You'll uncover some surprising facts and hopefully really grasp the why behind these huge seismic events.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's start with a woman whose maybe relentless ambition arguably kicked it all off, Empress Matilda. Born 1102, daughter of King Henry the Sark, William the Conqueror's youngest son. But what makes her claim so unique and, well, so problematic later is her mother, Matilda of Scotland,
Yes.
descended directly from Anglo-Saxon royalty. So this wasn't just diverse lineage, it was kind of a ticking time bomb, wasn't it? Competing claims, loyalties.
That's precisely it. You hit the nail on the head.
How did this unique heritage, this linked to both the Conqueror and England's ancient kings, how did that strengthen her position but also make things so fiercely contested?
Well, for the sort of residual Anglo-Saxon population, her mother offered this thread of continuity, a legitimizing factor, you could say.
Yeah.
But for the Norman barons, the ones holding the real power, it was her father's Norman bloodline that mattered most. So this duality, it meant she appealed to different groups, yes, but it also meant she carried this huge burden of appeasing often contradictory expectations.
Right.
It basically meant her claim, while technically strong on paper, became a political minefield right from the start.
And her life just became this political chess game incredibly early on.
Oh, absolutely.
At just 8 years old, 1110, Matilda was betrothed, sent off to Germany to marry Henry V, the Holy Roman Emperor, a man, 20 years older?
Roughly, yeah.
They married in 1114, weeks before her 12th birthday, which seems incredibly young, even for back then.
It was unusually young, yes. Clearly shows her as a political pawn, absolutely. But one destined for, immense influence.
And she wasn't just a figurehead over there, was she?
No, not at all. Her active political role as empress is often overlooked. For over a decade as Holy Roman Empress, she wasn't just sitting around. By 1116 or so, she was attending government councils, sponsoring measures, even governing imperial territories south of the Alps when her husband went back to Germany. Her involvement was pretty significant in resolving the investiture controversy, too. That huge struggle over who appoints bishops, the emperors, or the pope. A conflict that had shaped European politics for ages.
Right, a massive deal.
And her insistence later on being called Empress Matilda, even after leaving Germany. That's not just pride, it's a statement, isn't it? A belief in her own destiny.
It tells you so much about her strength, even then. But then, tragedy strikes. Her life takes this sudden, dramatic turn in 1120, the White Ship disaster.
Ah, the White Ship.
Yeah, her brother, William Adelin, the only male heir, dies when the ship, just like that.
Gone.
Leaving Matilda as Henry VI's only legitimate child, it must have thrown the entire English succession into just profound chaos.
Utter chaos.
Her father, names Matilda, his successor, makes his lords swear oaths. But why was a female monarch, especially one who'd been away in Germany for so long, such a radical, problematic idea?
Well, it really boils down to the foundational expectations of medieval kingship.
Okay.
Rulers weren't just administrators, they were warrior kings.
Yeah.
Expected to lead armies, project physical strength, martial prowess.
Right, lead from the front?
Exactly. A woman on the throne challenged every single one of those deeply ingrained norms. Plus, she'd been away so long it made it incredibly difficult for these fiercely independent, male-dominated English and Norman lords to accept her authority. Even with their oaths to Henry III. They worried. Could she command armies? Could she keep the peace? These were real concerns.
So, after her first husband, Henry V, dies in 1125, Matilda returns to England, only for her father, still desperate for a secure succession, to arrange another marriage in 1128, this time to Geoffrey Plantagenet, son of the Count of Anjou.
A key alliance, actually.
Politically astute, definitely, for the military backing, but apparently it was initially quite troubled, and it actually alienated some Norman lords.
It did. It wasn't a smooth match, personally, at first, and the Angevins were traditional rivals, so yeah, it rubbed some the wrong way. They did go on to have 3 sons, though. Henry, Geoffrey, and William, which was crucial for the future.
But the succession still wasn't settled. Henry III dies in 1135, and Matilda's cousin, Stephen of Blois, boom, seizes the throne.
Moves fast, very fast.
And this sparks the anarchy. Now, how would you describe the real impact of this period? Was it just a sort of dynastic squabble, or did it really plunge England into a different kind of chaos?
Oh, it was far more than a squabble.
Yeah.
The anarchy is the right name for it. It was a brutal civil war, leading to a near-complete collapse of central authority. Without a strong king, local lords just ran wild, building castles without permission, minting their own coins, waging private wars.
Yeah, total breakdown.
Pretty much. Widespread lawlessness, economic disaster, immense suffering for ordinary people. It wasn't just a fight for a crown. It felt like a fight for the very fabric of society. A decade and a half of just profound instability.
And yet, in the middle of all this chaos, Matilda's determination really comes through.
Absolutely. She doesn't give up.
With allies like her half-brother Robert of Gloucester, she invades England, gets a key victory in 1141, Battle of Lincoln. Stephen's captured, imprisoned.
A major turning point.
Matilda's proclaimed Lady of the English, gains support. But then her campaign to actually take London failed. The citizens just weren't willing.
London was wary. They'd backed Stephen initially, and Matilda apparently came across as quite haughty. they shut the gates on her.
And then she faces these multiple close calls. The escapes. Escaping Devizes Castle in burial clothes. Oxford Castle dressed in white against the snow during a siege.
Amazing stories.
Do these sound like maybe legends? Were they perhaps masking sheer desperation, or were they genuinely strategic reputation building?
That's a great question. I think it's likely a bit of both. The chroniclers certainly love the drama. And for Matilda, these weren't just desperate acts. They became part of her image, her unyielding persona.
Right.
She needed every scrap of support she could muster. And surviving a siege by, dressing in white to blend with the snow,
right,
that creates a powerful image, a mythos of an indomitable queen.
True.
She was constantly fighting for legitimacy, and these daring escapes reinforced her resilience, made her seem almost fated to survive. A trait her son Henry definitely inherited.
A legacy of just grit. Well, while she never actually secured the crown for herself, her, quote, doggedness ensured that her cause survived for long enough for her son to rise for.
A perfect summary.
In 1148, she actually leaves England, steps back, lets her eldest son Henry take over the fight, which brings us neatly to him.
Yes, King Henry II.
A true son of the anarchy. Born 1133, his childhood defined by his mother's relentless struggle.
That childhood, forged in the crucible of the anarchy, it undoubtedly shaped him. Made him tough, pragmatic, maybe ruthless.
Yeah.
And Henry's rise to power was just meteoric, nothing short. At 17, he's Duke of Normandy.
So young.
Then 1152, he makes this absolutely seismic move, marries Eleanor of Aquitaine, former wife of the King of France, Louis VII.
That was huge.
Huge. This marriage alone brought him these vast, rich territories across western France. It basically doubled his lands overnight. And then by 1154, Stephen dies, the Treaty of Wallingford is in effect, and Henry finally ascends the English throne. He fulfills his mother's lifelong ambition through him.
And what an empire he built. We're talking about the Angevin Empire. Just immense, stretching from Dublin all the way down to the Pyrenees, England, Wales, Ireland, Normandy, Anjou, Aquitaine, so much more. This made him effectively the most powerful ruler in Christendom.
Pretty much, yeah. Often overshadowing the French king, even though technically he was his vassal for the French lands.
It must have been a logistical nightmare to manage all that.
Absolutely. Yet, Henry II was genuinely an innovator, an excellent administrator.
Really? How so?
Well, he brought this unprecedented uniformity to England's courts and taxation system. He introduced reforms that really laid the groundwork for the modern jury system.
The jury system. From Henry II.
The beginnings of it, yes. Using 12 knights to adjudicate land disputes, for example. Moving away from older methods like trial by ordeal, he created a more centralized bureaucracy, professionalizing government. And he used these big building programs like the massive keep at Dover Castle.
Oh, yes!
As powerful acts of propaganda, showing strength, stability, prosperity after the chaos of the anarchy, rebuilding confidence.
You know, for all Henry's administrative genius and empire building, there's one conflict that just seems to overshadow so much.
Becket.
Thomas Becket, yeah. Henry appoints him Lord Chancellor, then Archbishop of Canterbury, expecting loyalty, right?
Total loyalty. They were close friends, allies.
But Becket fiercely defended church rights against royal power. What was it about Becket that made this relationship so profoundly volatile after years of close? And what were the last?
It's just this clash of two incredibly unyielding wills and a profound miscalculation by Henry. He expected Becket, his friend, his chancellor, to be basically a tool of royal policy within the church. But Becket, once he became archbishop, underwent this dramatic transformation, became this fervent, almost zealous defender of ecclesiastics.
So the flashpoint was the Constitutions of Clarendon, 1104.
That was it. Henry tried to bring clerics accused of crimes under royal court jurisdiction. Becket resisted fiercely. It led to his exile and the lasting consequence of Becket's murder in Canterbury Cathedral itself in 1107 was immense. Horrified Europe, forced Henry into public penance, and significantly strengthened the church's position as independent royal power. It really tarnished Henry's reign for generations.
Beyond England, Henry also launched a significant military intervention in Ireland, 1171-72, asserting English control over various Irish. That obviously had enduring, often tragic consequences for centuries.
Indeed, a long shadow.
But despite all his outward success, this vast empire, Henry faced constant rebellion from his own son, Henry the Younger, Richard, Geoffrey, often encouraged by their mother, Eleanor.
She played her own games, absolutely.
These family conflicts just defined his later reign, culminating in his death in 1189. It's said he died from the shock of discovering his youngest, maybe his favorite son, John, had joined the latest rebellion against. Was that truly the final blow, or just the culmination of years of family infighting finally breaking?
I think it's probably both. And it's a really profound insight into Henry, isn't it? His strength was this vast administrative and military capacity, but his profound weakness, his inability to control his own children, these ambitious adult sons chafing under his immense power.
Yeah.
That final betrayal by John wasn't just political, it was deeply personal. It underscored the fragility of even the greatest empires when built on such fractured family foundation. He saw his legacy, his family just collapse. And yeah, it seems it broke him.
The family drama just never stops, does it? Which leads us straight to King Richard I, Richard the Lionheart. Born 1157, another son of Henry and Eleanor, but he spent most of his life in France. Duke of Aquitaine at 14, quickly got this formidable reputation for military skill, hence Lion.
Yes, and he was apparently exceptionally tall for the time, over 6 feet, cultivated this image, great warrior, patron of troubadours, the chivalric ideal almost.
But his early life was also marked by rebellion against his own father, often allied with the French king.
Oh yeah, lots of family strife there. Despite that, he became the heir after his older brothers died, and upon his accession in 1189, Richard commits immediately. Third Crusade, massive undertaking. Reclaimed Jerusalem from Saladin after the disaster at Hattin in 1187.
Which required huge amounts of money.
Immense financial resources. Raised through the Saladin tithe, basically a tax on income and property that pretty much drained England's treasure.
His journey to the Holy Land itself sounds epic. France to Sicily, frees his sister Joan, conquers Messina,
Doesn't hang about.
then conquers Cyprus, which was actually a significant, tangible, long-term gain for the Crusaders, right? Not just symbolic.
Very strategic gain, yes.
Yeah.
Provided a vital base. And he married Berengaria of Navarre there, too.
Finally arrives at the Siege of Acre, 1191, a pivotal victory, showcasing his military.
Richard really gained immense fame for his military skill, especially the Battle of Arsuf against Saladin's forces. Richard's heavy cavalry broke Saladin's lighter, faster force through just disciplined formations and really well-timed charges.
What?
A tactical masterpiece by all accounts.
Wow.
He ultimately secured the coastline, got free access to Jerusalem for Christian pilgrims, but didn't actually capture the city itself. He opted for a 3-year truce in 1192.
Why not take Jerusalem?
He likely saw the strategic impossibility of holding it long-term, given his dwindling resources and the need to get back home. It was probably pragmatic.
But his return journey, that didn't go well.
Not at all. Fraught with peril. Richard gets captured in Austria by Duke Leopold, someone he'd insulted during the Crusade, and handed over to the Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI.
So he's held for ransom.
A staggering ransom. 100,000 mark. Held for over a year. And during this time, his own brother John is back home, plotting with the French king to usurp his throne.
Unbelievable. Imagine being held captive while your own brother tries to steal your kingdom.
The ultimate betrayal, really.
Richard eventually gets back to England in 1194. But then leaves again pretty quickly and never returns.
Never again. His reign was just defined by warfare. First the Crusade, then immediately back to France, fighting to rebuild his Angevin lands against King Philip II. That's when he built the impressive Chateau Gaillard, that famous castle. He died in 1199, crossbow wound, suppressing some minor revolt in France.
So his legacy is complex. Acclaimed warrior, crusader hero, but also criticized, right? Long absences, lack of focus on governing England itself, leaving the country deep in debt from all his wars.
Exactly. A brilliant general, perhaps, but arguably not a great king for England in terms of day-to-day governance.
Which brings us to the final and maybe the most infamous figure in our deep dive today, King John, born 1166, youngest of Henry II and Eleanor's 8 kids, nicknamed Lackland because Dad initially had no land. A tough start in that competitive family.
Definitely an indicator of his challenging position from the outset.
And what's so fascinating and often missed is that despite his later terrible reputation, John was actually highly...
Yes, very much so. At Fontevraud Abbey and then in the household of Ranulph de Glanville, Henry II's chief minister, he learned finance, taxation, administration skills he would later use quite effectively, even if, sometimes ruthlessly.
It's an incredible irony, isn't it? The king, so often seen as this total failure, was arguably the most administratively skilled of Henry's sons.
It absolutely is. Unlike Richard or Geoffrey, whose education was primarily martial, just knew the nuts and bolts of governance. He had a real talent for detail. Yet, his impulsiveness, his ambition, they were clear early on. Failed expedition to Ireland.
Right.
And then during Richard's crusade in captivity, he's openly plotting with Philip of France to seize the throne. Earns Richard's famous, maybe slightly patronizing forgiveness. John, have no fear, you are a child.
And you had bad men looking after you?
No.
Doesn't exactly inspire confidence.
No. And as king, after 1199, he faced constant conflict with Philip II. There was a temporary win with the Treaty of Goulet in 1200, but His military miscalculations, political missteps, including the suspected murder of his nephew Arthur, a rival claimant to the throne, led to this rapid loss of most of the Angevin lands on the continent. Normandy gone by 1204.
Huge blow.
Massive. His critics resurrected the nickname Soft Sword, and this loss, it was pivotal for England. It forced its kings to look inwards, focus on their island realm from then on.
His problems didn't stop there, did they? The clash with the Pope.
No, the conflict with the church was another disaster. John refused to accept Pope Innocent III's choice for Archbishop of Canterbury, Stephen Langton. Led to a bitter dispute. England placed under an interdict in 1208, churches closed, most sacraments denied. Then John himself was excommunicated in 1209.
How did he react?
Defiantly at first, seized church property to fund his wars. But finally, in 1213, facing invasion from France with paper backing, John did this dramatic U-turn, submitted England and Ireland to the Pope as feudal fiefs.
Okay, what did that actually mean? For England and Ireland to become feudal fiefs of the Pope, what was the significance?
It wasn't just symbolic, it was a radical political move. It meant John formally acknowledged the Pope as his overlord. Essentially, he was renting his kingdoms from the Pope.
Wow.
In exchange for crucial political and military protection. It made the Pope his feudal lord. It shocked many, but pragmatically it secured his immediate position against Philip II by removing the Pope's backing for the invasion.
Desperate.
A desperate gamble, yeah.
Yeah.
But a pragmatic one. However, this whole conflict profoundly weakened his authority and prestige among his own barons back home.
And this all just sets the stage for one of history's most famous doctrines.
Absolutely.
His heavy taxation trying to raise money to get those French lands back, ending in that crushing defeat at the Battle of Bouvines in 1214, and his increasingly arbitrary rule just alienated the barons.
They'd had enough. They rebelled,
Okay.
culminating in that famous meeting at Runnymede.
Runnymede, June 15th, 1215.
And there, John is compelled to seal the Articles of the Baron, which became Magna Carta. Now, it's important to remember, initially it was more of a peace treaty to stop a civil war than some grand declaration of universal rights.
Right, not quite what we think of it as today.
Exactly. It limited the king's power over taxation and feudal payment, promised access to swift justice, protected church rights. It even had a security clause allowing barons to basically monitor the king.
Which John must have.
Oh, he repudiated it almost immediately, with the Pope's backing, plunging England back into civil war. But Magna Carta survived, reissued, adapted over the years. It eventually became this huge cornerstone of Western liberty, establishing that enduring ideal: no one, not even the king, is above the law.
And John himself, he dies in 12 amidst that civil war, with Louis of France, Philip II's son, actually invading.
A rather ignominious end.
But his death, however messy, ultimately changed the state.
It did. It allowed his young son, Henry III, to be crowned, with the legendary William Marshal as regent. That rallied support, ended the war, and crucially secured the English throne for the Plantagenet, kept the French out.
And in that securing of the Plantagenet line, we see the culmination of this century of just relentless struggle, often within the family itself.
From Attila's foundational fight, her sheer doggedness, to Henry II's unprecedented empire building, and then the dramatic, often destructive reigns of Richard and John. One continuous saga. Ambition, power, betrayal, constant reshaping of England's future.
This whole era, though marked by such immense suffering, the Angevin conflicts, it fundamentally shaped the English monarchy and its relationship with its subjects, didn't it?
Undeniable.
From the radical challenge of a female ruler to forging an empire across Europe, the pursuit of crusades abroad, and then finally the imposition of limits on royal power itself. These reigns were just pivotal. They set England on a completely new course.
It really raises an important question, though, doesn't it? You think about Magna Carta, born out of King John's failures, really, out of Christ's incompetent, deep personal error.
Yeah.
Yet it eventually became this global symbol of liberty and the rule of law. What does that tell us about the nature of progress itself? How often do history's greatest advancements emerge not from deliberate, brilliant planning, but from moments of intense pressure, intense crisis, and profound human fallibility?
We're jumping into a really fascinating period of English history, looking at the monarchy from 1216 right through to 1377. We've got some great sources, mainly a detailed historical account we'll be drawing from. Our mission really is to unpack the reigns of four quite Henry III, Edward I, Edward II. We want to pull out the key insights, maybe some surprising facts, and just understand how the turbulent time really shaped England.
Absolutely. And it's more than just, king after king. This period lays the groundwork for so much England's constitution, its military approach, its whole social structure, really. It's a time of huge transformation, often kind of overlooked, but the echoes are definitely there for centuries after.
Okay, so let's dive in with Henry III. He becomes king in 1216, and he's just 9. His father, King John, has just died. The country's smack in the middle of the First Barons' War, and there's even a French prince who's been proclaimed king over here. That's inheriting chaos, isn't it?
Complete chaos. And what's really crucial right at the start is the regency government that steps, especially William Marshal, the Earl of Pembroke. He was incredibly capable.
Right, the famous knight.
The very one. He stabilizes things remarkably quickly. There are key military victories, Lincoln on land, then a vital naval win off Sandwich, and critically, he helps negotiate the Treaty of Lambeth in 1217.
That's where the French prince, Louis, agrees to give up his claim.
Exactly. Louis renounces his claim, packs his bag, and maybe most importantly for the long run, Henry's government agrees right then to uphold Magna Carta. That act really cements its place right from the start of Henry's reign. It's foundational.
So the groundwork is laid, but then Henry takes personal control. What was his rule actually like? I understand he was deeply pious.
Very much so. He loved religious festivals, apparently fasted quite severely sometimes, poured money into the church. The huge rebuilding of Westminster Abbey, that was his project, a massive undertaking.
But politically, he seems to have struggled, relying on advisors like Hubert de Burgh, Peter de Roche, even when he was well into his 20s.
He did. He found it hard to really assert himself in that sort of strong, martial way his barons expect. His piety was genuine, but it also perhaps served as a substitute for the political and military clout he lacked, especially compared to, say, the French kings he admired.
How did his actual character play into this? People at the time described him, didn't they?
They did. Descriptions like sanguine and uncomplicated, but also overly modest, someone with a desire to please others. It sounds nice, maybe, but in a king, it led to problems. Things like the Sicilian business.
Ah, yes, the attempt to make his son king of Sicily.
Right. A hugely expensive and ultimately doomed venture that achieved nothing but drain the treasury and annoy the baron. It contributed to friction, even with his own brother, Richard of Cornwall, who was incredibly wealthy and influential in his own right.
And how did he handle things on the border? England wasn't exactly isolated.
It was a mixed bag. With Scotland, the Treaty of York in 1237 actually set a border that lasted, and relations were pretty stable for a lot of his reign, which is quite an achievement.
Okay, that's a pause.
But Wales was constantly fractious, always needing attention, sometimes military campaign. And then there was the issue of his French relatives. His wife was from Provence, his mother's family were Poitevin nobles. Their growing influence at court caused huge resentment among the English nobility.
That feeling of foreigners getting all the good jobs and influence.
Pretty much. And it all got tangled up with the controversial marriage of his sister, Eleanor, to Simon de Montfort, another French-born figure who became incredibly powerful and eventually Henry's greatest enemy.
You also mention a shift in policy towards the Jewish community during his reign.
Yes, it's quite significant. Initially, his piety expressed itself in patronizing the Damas Conversorum, a place for Jewish converts to Christianity. He seemed to genuinely want voluntary conversion.
So a sort of carrot approach initially.
You could say that. But by the 1250s, things hardened. The Statute of Jewry in 1253 brought in much more coercive measures. Things like forcing Jews into specific areas, making them wear identifying badges, restricting their interactions. It definitely foreshadows the expulsion that happens later.
And all this discontent, the foreign influence, the perceived weakness, it eventually boils over.
It does. The Second Barons' War kicks off in 1258. Leading nobles, with Simon de Montfort at the forefront, force Henry to accept the provisions of Oxford and later the provisions of Westminster.
And these weren't just minor tweaks, were they?
Oh no. These were revolutionary for the time. They basically set up a baronial council to oversee appointments, finance, policy. It was an attempt to create a kind of constitutional monarch, radically limiting the king's personal power.
A direct challenge. How did Henry react?
He resisted, naturally, and he made quite a bold move. He went to France in 1259 to get his brother-in-law, the highly respected King Louis IX, to arbitrate.
And Louis sided with
Henry. The Mise of Amiens, Louis's judgment, basically annulled the provision, but the barons weren't having it. They chose war instead.
Which led to those key battles.
Louis in 1264 was a disaster for the royal. Henry was actually captured, partly because his son, Edward the future Edward I, charged off the battlefield in pursuit and left his father exposed.
Foreshadowing Edward's character, perhaps?
Perhaps. But then came Evesham in 1265, a brutal battle. De Montfort was killed, his body mutilated, and Henry was freed by Edward, who had learned some hard lessons. The rebellion was crushed.
So Henry gets his throne back securely. What's his overall legacy then? Often seems overshadowed.
He is often overshadowed, isn't he? By his father's notoriety and his son's military fame. But, he did bring stability after John's reign. He did reestablish royal authority after 2 civil wars. He secured that Scottish border. He reigned for 56 years, a very long time. Maybe he wasn't the warrior king some wanted, but he held the kingdom together, and his piety gave us Westminster Abbey. Not a bad legacy, all things considered.
Okay, let's move on to that son, Edward I, Longshank, born 1239. Very different from his father, physically and in temperament. Towering figure, apparently 6 foot, much more.
Absolutely. A stark contrast. Edward was purposeful, energetic, sometimes rude, qualities that defined his reign. He really saw himself as an architect of the state, and in many ways he was.
How so? What were his big reforms?
Well, he undertook huge reform. Crown government, administration, finance. He introduced that crucial customs duty on wool export, which became a major source of royal income. Big legal reforms, too, with the Statutes of Westminster clarifying land law.
And Parliament. He's often credited with developing Parliament significantly.
He is, and rightly so. He really established the system of representatives, 2 knights from each shire, 2 burgesses from the towns being summoned regularly. Not necessarily out of democratic principle, but because it was an effective way to gain consent for taxation legislation. It created this ongoing dialogue between the crown and the community of the realm. That's a massive development.
Yeah, you can really see the seeds of modern government being sown there. And his ambitions weren't just domestic, were they? Wales looms large.
Hugely. The conquest of Wales was arguably his defining military achievement. Campaigns in the 1270s and 80s systematically crushed Welsh independence. Llewellyn ap Gruffudd killed, his brother Dafydd executed.
And the castles?
Oh, the castles. Conwy, Caernarfon, Harlech, Beaumaris, the Iron Ring, masterpieces of military architecture designed to dominate the landscape and the people. Then he imposed English law and administration through the Statute of Wales in 1284. It was a thorough subjugation.
But alongside the state building and conquest, there's a much darker side, the expulsion of the Jews in 1290.
Yes, a grim event. Building on those later policies of his father, Edward intensified the pressure. He'd already outlawed lending money at interest usury, which was a key economic function for many Jews. More restrictions? The badge. Ultimately, driven by a combination of deep-seated medieval anti-Semitism and, frankly, financial gain, he canceled debts owed to Jews and confiscated their property. He ordered the entire community, maybe 2,000 to 3,000 people, out of.
A chilling decision, and his focus then shifts north to Scotland.
It does. He saw Scotland very much as a subordinate kingdom, owing him feudal allegiance. When the Scottish throne became vacant, the great cause, he intervened, acting as arbiter.
And he chased John Balliol.
He did, but essentially as his puppet. He treated Balliol not as a fellow king, but as a vassal, demanding humiliating levels of obedience. When Balliol eventually resisted and made an alliance with France, England's enemy, Edward, saw it as outright rebellion.
Yeah, so he invades.
He invades in 1296, sacks Berwick-upon-Tweed quite brutally, wins easily at the Battle of Dunbar, captures Balliol, strips him of his kingship, and famously takes the Stone of Scone, their coronation stone, back to Westminster Abbey.
A symbol of conquest.
He imposed English administration, thinking he'd sorted Scotland out for good. He genuinely seemed to believe he was just reasserting a long-standing English overlordship.
But it wasn't sorted out, was it?
Not even close. This provoked fierce resistance. The Scottish Wars of Independence really kick off. You get figures like William Wallace winning that stunning victory at Stirling Bridge.
Right, Braveheart territory, though maybe not quite.
Probably not quite. Edward defeats Wallace later at Falkirk, using his longbowmen to devastating effect. But the resistance continues under Robert the Bruce. Despite Edward's military skill and determination, he just couldn't fully crush the Scots. He died in 1307, actually on his way north for another campaign, still trying to subdue Scotland.
Which earned him that nickname, Hammer of the Scots, a formidable ruler, but left a legacy of war and debt.
Very much so. Powerful, reforming, but also brutal and costly.
Which brings us to his son, Edward II. Born in Caernarfon Cask, first English heir apparent, formally styled Prince of Wales, but very different from his father again, often described as unkingly.
That's the word off. Tall, handsome, athletic like his father apparently. But he just didn't seem interested in the traditional pursuits of kingship, war, tournaments, statecraft. Contemporaries noted his fondness for strange pastimes.
Like swimming, digging ditches, thatching roofs. Things nobles wouldn't dream of.
Exactly. It wasn't just quirky. It was seen as undermining the dignity of the crown, and it created space for others to wield influence. The central issue of his reign really becomes his intense favoritism.
Starting with Piers Gaveston.
Piers Gaveston, his first, most notorious favorite. Edward III that actually exiled Gaveston, seeing the unhealthy influence he had on his son. But one of Edward II's first acts as king was to recall him and lavish him with titles and honors, including the earldom of Cornwall.
Which must have gone down badly with the established nobility.
Like a lead balloon. Gaveston was apparently quite arrogant, gave insulting nicknames to the great earls, calling the Earl of Warwick the Black Dog of Arden, for instance. They felt utterly sidelined. There was this quote about there being 2 kings reigning in one kingdom.
Led to crises, didn't it? The ordinances of 1311.
Yes. The Lords Ordainers, a committee of powerful earls, forced the ordinances on Edward. They aimed to control royal appointments, finances, and critically demanded Gaveston's permanent exile.
But Edward couldn't let him go.
He couldn't. His attachment seemed incredibly deep. He kept trying to bring Gaveston back, defying the ordinances. Eventually, Gaveston was captured by the Earl of Warwick, the Black Dog, and executed without trial at Blacklow Hill in 1312.
A brutal act outside the law.
Absolutely, and it created an irreparable rift. Edward never forgave those responsible. The kingdom was deeply divided.
And then came military disaster, Bannockburn, 1340.
A catastrophe for England. Robert the Bruce inflicted a crushing defeat on a much larger English army led by Edward himself. It effectively secured Scottish independence for generations and completely reversed Edward I's game. A massive blow to royal prestige.
Compounded by famine as well, wasn't it? The Great Famine hit in the 1310s.
Yes. Several years of terrible weather, crop failures, widespread starvation, disease. It created immense suffering and instability across northern Europe, and England was hit hard, just added to the sense of crisis around it.
After Gaveston, did the favourites stop?
Unfortunately not. The Despensers, father and son Hugh Despenser the Elder and Hugh Despenser the Younger, rose to prominence. They became even more powerful and inquisitive than Gaveston, especially in Wales and the Welsh March, grabbing lands like the lordship of Glamorgan.
Provoking the Marcher, people like Roger Mortimer.
Precisely. The Despensers' greed and influence provoked rebellion, particularly from powerful Marcher families like the Mortimers and Bowens, who saw their own power threatened. Edward managed to defeat this rebellion, initially executing the Earl of Lancaster, a key opponent. For a while, the Despensers seemed unassailable.
But the opposition didn't just come from the barons, did it? His own wife, Queen Isabella, played a crucial role.
A decisive role. Isabella, sister of the French king, felt increasingly alienated and humiliated. Edward seemed to prefer the company of Hugh Despenser the Younger. Her lands were confiscation. Even custody of her children was given to Despenser's wife.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was. In 1325, Isabella went to France, ostensibly on a diplomatic mission, but she refused to return. Instead, she formed an alliance, and likely, a personal relationship with the exiled Roger Mortimer. They became the focus for all the discontent against Edward and the Despensers.
And they used her son, the future Edward III.
Cleverly, yes. They arranged for young Prince Edward to join her in France. He became the figurehead for their cause, lending it legitimacy.
So in 1326, they invade.
They land in England with a small force, but support for Edward II just collapsed. London rises in their favor. The Despensers are captured and executed with particular brutality. Hugh the Younger was famously hanged, drawn, and quartered. He fled. Was eventually captured in Wales. In January 1327, Parliament forced him to abdicate in favor of his son, a deeply humiliating.
His death later that year at Berkeley Castle, officially.
But the timing was incredibly convenient for Isabella and Mortimer, who were now ruling in young Edward III's name. Rumors swirled almost immediately, the famous gruesome story of the red-hot poker, designed to kill without leaving external marks, or even stories that he escaped and lived out his days as a hermit. We'll likely never know for sure, but his son, Edward III, later had Mortimer executed, citing his father's murder as one of the charges.
Which brings us neatly to Edward III, born 1312. Grows up watching his father's disastrous reign, then under the regency of his mother, Isabella.
He doesn't wait long. In 1330, when he's just shy of 18, he stages a dramatic coup at Nottingham Castle. Secret passages involved, apparently. He has Mortimer arrested inside the castle. Isabella is effectively sidelined.
A bold move for a teenager.
Very bold. Mortimer is quickly tried and executed for treason, including, as we said, the murder of Edward II. Edward III asserts his own authority, decisively ending the regent. It signals a return to strong, active kingship.
And he immediately turns his attention back to Scotland.
He does. He wasn't going to accept Bannockburn as the final word. He backs a claimant to the Scottish throne, Edward Balliol, against the young King David II, Robert the Bruce. At the Battle of Halidon Hill in 1333, the English army, relying heavily on their longbow, wins a devastating victory.
The longbow starting to show its dominance.
Absolutely. It smashed the Scottish schiltrons, their pike formation. The battle basically reversed the situation after Bannockburn, allowing Edward to install Balliol briefly and regain control of Berwick and much of southern Scotland.
So England's back on the offensive. What does this mean for the bigger picture, especially with France?
Well, Edward had a very strong claim to the French throne himself through his mother Isabella. The French, meanwhile, continued to support the Scots. These factors, combined with disputes over territory in France, like Gascony, and commercial rivalries, all build up. In 1337, Edward formally claims the French throne, and the 100 Years' War kicks off.
A war that would define his reign and England for decades. And he proved to be a pretty capable commander.
More than capable. A military innovator, really. His navy won a crucial victory at Sluys in 1340, destroying the French fleet and securing control of the English Channel, vital for invading France.
And on land, the famous victory.
Crécy in 1346 is the standout early victory. Edward's army, though outnumbered, used a combination of dismounted men-at-arms and those devastating longbow volleys to annihilate the French Knights' cavalry charge. They even used a few primitive cannons, one of the first times artillery appears on a European battlefield.
A tactical revolution.
Pretty much. Then came the long, successful siege and capture of Calais in 1347. That gave England a secure foothold in northern France that lasted over 200 years. And while Edward was busy in France, his forces won another major victory back home at Neville's Cross in 1346, capturing King David II of Scotland.
Wow, so capturing two enemy kings within a decade, that's quite something.
It gave him incredible prestige and leverage. But just as English fortunes seemed at their peak, disaster struck from the different direction.
The Black Death.
The Black Death arrives in England in 1348, an unimaginable catastrophe. It wiped out maybe a third, perhaps even close to half the population in just a couple of years. Social and economic upheaval on a scale never seen before.
How did the country and Edward cope?
It was incredibly tough, obviously. But Edward's government responded pragmatic. The Statute of Labours in 1351 tried to control wages and prevent peasants exploiting the labor shortage. Though it wasn't very effective, it chose an attempt to manage the crisis. It also strengthened the role of local justices of the peace, embedding royal authority deeper into the counties, which had long-lasting effects on English local government.
And culturally, he founded the Order of the Guard.
Yes, around 1348. England's most prestigious chivalric order still exists today. It was partly about rewarding his key commanders, binding them closer to him, but also consciously harking back to Arthurian legend, creating this image of England as a realm of chivalry and military prowess with him at the center. He also poured vast sums into rebuilding Windsor Castle, turning it into the magnificent royal residence it is now.
And a really interesting point from the shift towards using English.
Yes, this is subtle but hugely significant. In the 1360s, English starts being formally used in Parliament and the law courts, replacing French, which had been the language of government and the elite since the Norman Conquest. It reflects a growing sense of distinct English national identity, separate from France, partly fueled by the ongoing war, a really key moment for the development of the English language itself.
Okay. Back to the war. After the Black Death, did the English successes continue?
They did, for a while. The Battle of Poitiers in 1356 was another stunning victory, this time led by Edward's son, the famous Black Prince. Not only did they defeat the French army, they captured the French king, Jean II.
Capturing another king.
Incredible, isn't it? This gave Edward immense bargaining power. The Treaty of Bretigny in 1360 was a result. England gained full sovereignty over vast territories in France, Aquitaine, Calais, Ponthieu, and received a huge ransom for King Jean. It really marked the high point of English power in France.
But it didn't last forever.
No. In Edward's later years, his health declined. The Black Prince also suffered from France found a capable new king in Charles V and a brilliant general in Bertrand de Guesclin. They started to chip away at the English gains using Fabian tactics, avoiding pitched battles, focusing on sieges and guerrilla warfare. By Edward's death in 1377, England had lost much of what it gained at Bretigny, but still, his reign fundamentally changed England.
So looking back over this whole period, 1216 to 1377, what a century of change. You go from the chaos under John Henry III struggling with barons, Edward II's deposition, to the powerful state-building reigns of Edward I and Edward III, forging this much more centralized, militarily formidable kingdom. It really feels like medieval England was defined.
I think that's right. If you connect the dots, this period is where so many key elements of England's future identity and power structure are forged. Parliament's development, the common law system, the military reputation built on the longbow, even the emergence of English as the national language. It all happens amidst this constant conflict, adaptation, and evolution.
What really stands out to you personally from this whole era, and how do you think these reigns, these events from 700 years ago still resonate today, maybe in our institutions or even national identity?
Well, here's a thought to leave. We often focus on the personalities of the kings, right? Henry's piety, Edward III's forcefulness, Edward II's failures, Edward III's triumph. But maybe the real story is how the challenges themselves, the constant wars, the civil strife, the economic shocks, even the Black Death, how these relentless pressures forced England to develop the variants, the administrative machinery, the military innovations that made it such a resilient and powerful state for centuries after. Perhaps it was less about the individual on the throne and more about the kingdom learning, adapting, and strengthening itself under extreme duress. We're plunging into a period of English history that's, as dramatic and complex as any fantasy saga, really.
Absolutely. Imagine kings crowned as children, devastating plagues changing everything, and the fight for a throne leading to, decades of civil war.
We're talking England from 1377 to 1471, a really turbulent century that kind of set the stage for the infamous Wars of the Roses.
That's right. And our mission for you, the listener, is to help you quickly grasp the intricate political, social, and intensely personal forces at play. We'll explore four monarchs: Richard II, Henry IV, V, and VI.
Yeah, looking at the key events, their personalities, and how their reign, how they all connected to create this legacy of instability.
And we've drawn on detailed historical accounts, so it's a rich picture we're painting.
Okay, so let's open that first chapter. Richard II, the boy king. His story starts in Bordeaux, France, 1367, son of the famous Edward the Black Prince. Can you set the scene? How did this boy end up on the throne?
Well, it was rapid and really unexpected. Richard was just a toddler when his older brother Edward died of the plague, back in 1370. Then his father, the Black Prince, he died in 76, probably from dysentery he picked up campaigning. So by 1377, when his grandfather Edward III died, Richard's only 10, and suddenly he's king. Richard of Bordeaux, they called him.
Wow. 10 years old and inheriting a kingdom still stuck in the 100 Years' War. That sounds like a huge challenge, needing a minority government. How did that even work?
It was volatile, yeah. Powerful uncles like John of Gaunt basically stepped in to run things, but their main focus was keeping order and, crucially, funding the war with France, which was going very bad.
So not much focus on Richard himself.
Not really in the early chronicles. They were more concerned with the politics. England was struggling. Heavy taxes, like that really unpopular poll tax, weren't even covering the costs of a failing war.
And on top of war and taxes, there was this major religious movement brewing, too.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about Wycliffe and the Lollards.
Yeah, John Wycliffe, an Oxford theologian. He started pushing for some pretty radical church reform, questioning the Pope's power, challenging doctrines like transubstantiation.
Bread and wine becoming Christ's body and blood.
Exactly. He even started translating the Bible into English, which was revolutionary. His ideas, often quite egalitarian, really took hold among ordinary people and priests, the Lollards. It definitely foreshadowed the Reformation.
So you have these egalitarian ideas floating around, plus the poll tax, leading to the Peasants' Revolt in 1381. That must have been huge for young Richard.
Oh, immense. The revolt, led by figures like Wat Tyler and John Ball, saw rebels march on London. They burned John of Gaunt's Savoy Palace, even killed the Archbishop of Canterbury. It was chaos.
And Richard, what'd he do?
Faced with this, Richard, who's only 14, rides out to Smithfield to confront them directly. When Wat Tyler is killed in the confusion, Richard, incredibly bravely, offers clemency himself to the rebels.
Wow, at 14, that takes nerve.
It does, but it was also maybe his first taste of absolute power. He saw how a crisis could be handled, perhaps with force and a promise that was later broken once the danger passed. A dangerous lesson.
Right. A lesson in power, but maybe the wrong kind. How did experiences like that shape him as he got older?
Well, he's described as handsome, intelligent, certainly well-read, religious too, but also increasingly autocratic. Some later biographers even suggest traits of narcissistic personality disorder, maybe even schizophrenia, though that's speculation.
And his personal life.
His marriage to Anne of Bohemia in 1382, it was political, but they genuinely seem to have loved each other. Her death in 1394 hit him hard and possibly removed a moderating influence just as his autocratic tendencies were growing.
So he started consolidating power, clashing with Parliament.
Yes, he began appointing favorites like Michael de la Pole and Robert de Vere, clashed frequently with Parliament over war funding, and really tried to centralize power around himself.
Which inevitably led to pushback from the nobles, his uncle.
Exactly. It all boiled over with the wonderful Parliament in 1386, demanding reform. Richard tried to assert his authority, but that led straight into conflict with the Lords Appellant, a powerful group of nobles.
They seized control, didn't they?
They did, effectively, in 1388. They exiled or executed Richard's favorites in the merciless Parliament. It was a major humiliation.
But the funny thing is, these Lords Appellant, they criticized Richard's spending, but then they faced the same money problems themselves, right?
Absolutely. It shows the deep financial hole England was in. They even ended up agreeing to a truce with France, but Richard didn't forget the humiliation.
No, I bet he didn't.
After things calmed down a bit in the early 1390s, Richard, now fully in charge, clearly held grudges. From 1397, he moved decisively. He arrested and had his own uncle, Thomas of Woodstock, murdered.
His own uncle, wow.
Yeah. He packed Parliament, overturned previous laws, adopted this more absolutist style, demanding people call him High Majesty, really trying to put himself above challenge.
But this push for absolute power, it backfired spectacularly with his cousin, Henry Bolingbroke. What was the big mistake?
The fatal miscalculation. It came in 1399. John of Gaunt died, and Richard disinherited Gaunt's son, Henry Bolingbroke, seizing all the huge Lancastrian lands.
Ah, the Lancastrian estates. That was the trigger.
Exactly. A mess. Bolingbroke was already exiled, but he came back while Richard was off campaigning in Ireland again. Richard returned to find almost no support left. He had to surrender castle.
And this wasn't just a king being overthrown. He was formally deposed. That set a dangerous precedent, didn't it?
Huge. It shattered the idea of inviolable kingship. He was formally deposed on October 1st, 1399, and then just a few months later, February 1400, he was starved to death at Pontefract Castle, making sure he couldn't come back.
A grim end. So Richard's gone. In steps. Henry Bolingbroke, Henry IV, born the same year as Richard, 1367, John of Gaunt's son. What kind of man was he?
Henry was, well, he was groomed for leadership. Very well educated. Latin, English, French, loved music, book, also a skilled knight. He had seen Richard's betrayal back during the Peasants' Revolt.
Right, you mentioned.
Yeah, that probably taught him he could never really trust his cousin. He'd gained a reputation, too, jousting, going on crusade, pilgrimage to Jerusalem, a cultured warrior.
So, skilled, experience, but his claim to the throne wasn't the strongest, was it? Edmund Mortimer technically had a better claim through Lionel of Clarence.
Technically, yes, genealogically. But Henry had the military power, and crucially, he had the backing of the political community. They were sick of Richard's tyranny and didn't want another child king or, more instability.
Whose support trumped lineage.
In this case, yes. He was crowned Henry IV on October 13th, 1399, England's first Lancaster.
But that act of usurpation, while it ended Richard's rule, it fundamentally destabilized the succession, didn't it? Creating that precedent for rival claims later on.
Absolutely. It cast a long shadow, and his reign was immediately difficult. Primarily, money, or lack of it.
Constant financial strain.
Constant. He had to rely heavily on his own Lancastrian wealth, and Parliament was always demanding accountability, wanting cut. Plus, rebellions up.
Glendower in Wales, the Scots.
And powerful English nobles, too, like the Percys Hotspur, who'd actually mentored Henry's own son. They felt Henry hadn't delivered on promises made.
And the church was putting pressure on him, too.
Yeah.
About the Lollards.
They were, pressing him to clamp down. That led to the De Heretico Combrendo statute in 1401.
On the burning of heretics. Grim stuff.
It was. And adding to all his problems, from about 1405, Henry started suffering from this debilitating illness. Some kind of skin disease, maybe leprosy, maybe something else, we don't know. Similar to the Black Prince, it slowly...
So his reign sounds like just constant crisis management. What was his legacy then?
Well, unlike Richard, Henry IV basically had to accommodate Parliament's growing influence. His need for money forced him into this, partnership, setting a precedent for kings working with Parliament, even if it was often tense.
More pragmatic, out of necessity, perhaps.
But that pragmatism, however forced, ensured his dynasty survived, and it really prepared his son, Henry V, for what was to come.
Okay, so Henry V survives, manages to hold it together, and paves the way for his son, Henry V, the famous warrior king, born 1386. What was his upbringing like?
Henry V was really forged in conflict. He was actually taken hostage by Richard II when he was 12, saw his own father usurp the throne. His military career started incredibly young.
Right, fighting Owen Glendower in Wales from age 13.
Exactly, and he wasn't just fighting. He learned vital lessons there, managing finances for campaigns, military strategy, especially siege warfare, capturing fortresses systematically, and how to build loyalty with his men.
And he nearly died doing it, didn't he?
He did. Took an arrow to the face at the Battle of Shrewsbury in 1403, fighting against Hotspur. Showed incredible courage just surviving that, let alone recovering.
As his father's health failed, young Henry got more involved in government. Was there tension there?
Oh, definitely. Clashes over policy, annuities, alliances with France. But there was also that famous reconciliation in 1412 where Henry supposedly offered his father his dagger, pledging it smoothed things over before Henry IV died. Shows his sense of duty, perhaps.
So when he's crowned in 1413, he comes in with a clear purpose. He did things like releasing rivals, reburying Richard II.
Absolutely. Very smart unifying gesture. Henry V had this almost messianic sense of purpose. He felt he had a divine mission, not just to secure Lancastrian rule in England, but to finally make good on that claim to the throne.
And he dealt harshly with dissent, the Lollard.
Ruthless. Even though it was led by an old friend, Sir John Oldcastle, it showed his determination, seen as God's chosen, and unifying England behind his great branch.
Which brings us to Agincourt, 1415, one of the most famous battles in English. How did he prepare for that invasion?
Meticulous. He strengthened the army, the navy, built alliances, made sure England and Wales were secure behind him. He was creative with fundraising too.
Funding it must have been tough.
Oh yeah, pawn and crown jewels, borrowing heavily. He really worked to build national support. Then after taking Harfleur, his army was heading for Calais, quite depleted, and they ran into this much larger French force at Agincourt.
And the battle itself, the conditions were key, weren't they?
Absolutely crucial. It was fought in thick, sticky mud after heavy rain. The narrow battlefield basically funneled the French knights, making their numbers less effective.
And the longbows, of course.
Devastatingly effective against the bogged-down French cavalry and men-at-arms. And then there was the controversial decision to kill the French prisoners mid-battle.
Why did he do that?
Fear they might rearm themselves or overpower their guards while the battle still raged. Controversial, but decisive. Agincourt was this spectacular, almost unbelievable victory. It made Henry V the legend.
But he didn't stop there. He carried on with the conquest of Normandy.
He did. Systematically. He was also very clever politically, exploiting the Civil War, tearing France apart between the Armagnacs and the Burgundians.
Right, the rival faction.
He secured a vital alliance, Burgundy. This relentless pressure, military and political, led to the Treaty of Troyes in 1420.
The treaty that seemed to achieve everything.
It really did on paper. It named Henry V as regent, an heir to the French throne. He married Catherine of Valois, the French king's daughter. It looked like Edward III's old dream, uniting the two crowns, finally.
An incredible achievement. But then tragedy strikes.
Devastatingly so. Henry V died suddenly of dysentery while campaigning in France in August, only 5. Never even met his infant son, Henry.
And then, just like that,
Yeah.
gone. His death changed everything.
Completely. It left England with a 9-month-old king, Henry VI, and a regency government that just couldn't sustain the massive effort needed to hold on. The whole structure depended on. His death created a power vacuum that proved disastrous.
Which leaves England with an infant king. Henry VI, born December 1421, King of England at 9 months, King of France technically at 10 months. A regency council had to rule.
Yes, including his uncle. Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, and John, Duke of Bedford, were key figures, along with Cardinal Beaufort.
So, friction right from the start. Those uncles weren't exactly allies, were they?
Oh, absolutely not. Gloucester was ambitious, favored continuing the war. Cardinal Beaufort was more peace-minded and incredibly wealthy. He often bankrolled the government. Their rivalry deeply influenced the young king and caused constant infighting.
And meanwhile, in France,
Things started to unravel. Despite some early English successes, Joan of Arc appears in 1429, inspires the French, the Siege of Orleans is lifted, Charles II is crowned at Rheims, a huge symbolic blow.
so Henry VI's coronation in Paris was kind of an afterthought.
Pretty much. He was crowned King of France there in 1431, but it was rushed, overshadowed. The real turning point was 1435 when the Duke of Burgundy switched sides, abandoned the English alliance.
And that led to losing Paris.
Swiftly. After that, it was a slow, grinding loss of territory. By 1453, pretty much everything Henry V had won, apart from Calais, was the 100 Years' War just sort of fizzled out.
Turning to Henry VI himself, what was he like as a person, and how did that affect his rule?
Well, by all accounts, he was genuinely pious, very generous, quite mild-mannered. He founded Eton College, King's College, Cambridge, so he valued education.
But not cut out for kingship.
Not really. He lacked political skill, diplomatic know. He'd interfere with justice, issuing pardons seemingly at random. Terrible with money, gave away lands and funds the crown desperately needed, duplicated grants.
Generous to a fault, it sounds like. Ruinously so.
Exactly. His poor financial management and lack of governance really fueled discontent among the nobles and ordinary people. He just didn't grasp what was needed.
And his marriage didn't help either.
No, his marriage to Margaret of Anjou in 1445 was politically necessary, but the terms involved ceding Maine back to France, deeply unpopular. Margaret was strong-willed and became increasingly influential as Henry became more, well, detached.
And key figures around him started disappearing.
Yes, the deaths of Gloucester, arrested on dubious treason charges, and Cardinal Beaufort, both in 1447, removed powerful, experienced counselors, even if they often clashed. It left Henry more reliant on less capable advisors, like the Duke of Suffolk, who became deeply unpopular himself.
So you've got lost French territories, financial chaos, unpopular advisors. England sounds like a powder keg. What lit the fuse for civil war?
The discontent was boiling over. Jack Cade's rebellion in Kent in 1450, protesting corruption and the losses in France, even forced Henry to flee London. Then his cousin, Richard, Duke of York, who had that rival claim to the throne, returned from Ireland and started asserting himself.
But the real turning point for Henry personally came in 1453.
Yes. He suffered a complete mental breakdown. Just catatonic, unable to speak, react, rule. It might have been an inherited illness, possibly from his French grandfather, Charles VI, who had similar episodes.
Wow, and right when his son was born.
Exactly. Queen Margaret gave birth to their son, Edward, securing the Lancastrian succession, but Henry's collapse allowed Richard of York to be named protector of the realm.
But Henry recovered.
Temporarily, yes, in 1454. And one of the first things he did was undo York's reforms and release York's main rival, the Duke of Somerset.
Ah, and that must have been the spark.
That was it. The power struggle between York, backed by nobles like Warwick, and the Queen's factions supporting Somerset erupted into open fighting at the First Battle of St. Albans. That's generally seen as the start of the Rose.
And Henry VI just became a pawn in it all.
Pretty much. He was captured, released, deposed by York's son Edward IV, briefly restored during the readoption, then captured again, and finally murdered in the Tower of London in 1471, almost certainly on Edward V.
So his weakness, his illness, his poor decisions,
Yeah.
They were major factors in plunging England into decades of...
Undeniably. His ineffectual rule and lack of leadership created the vacuum that allowed the dynastic rival, a tragic figure in many ways, but his reign was disastrous for England.
And there we have it. Quite a journey through nearly a century. Richard II's reach for absolutism, Henry V's struggle for legitimacy, Henry V's fleeting glory, and Henry VI's catastrophic failure. You really see this thread of instability, don't you?
You absolutely do. It shows how politics, personality, health, it's all interconnected, and how the choices made or not made by one generation can really ignite conflicts that burn for decades afterwards.
So, after diving into all that ambition, war, deposition, and tragedy, what do you, our listener, think? Was there one single moment, one decision, or maybe one person's failing that really sealed England's fate for that bloody 15th century? Definitely something to think about.
We are taking a truly monumental deep dive. We're looking at, well, over 700 years of English statecraft.
Yeah, it's quite the span.
Moving from, the muddy battlefields of 9th century Viking conflicts right up to the politically charged high-stakes court of 16th century Tudor England.
It's a huge undertaking. Definitely. Our source stack for this is vast, as you can imagine. It covers everything from military innovations and legal revolutions to just sheer moments of political and personal audacity.
Right.
We've tried to extract the defining moments of 8 really consequential monarchs. Each one essentially inherited chaos, but fundamentally transformed the English state.
Often through pretty tough means, it sounds like.
Oh, absolutely. Necessary ruthlessness, complex bureaucratic engineering, the works.
So our mission for you, the learner, is to cut through all these centuries of upheaval and find those crucial kind of technical nuggets of knowledge.
Exactly.
We aren't just summarizing names and dates here. We're really looking at the specific mechanism, the administrative blueprints, the financial workarounds, the legal systems that these rulers invented and well utilized.
And these things set the irreversible trajectory for England. It's about how they did it.
We'll proceed broadly chronologically, showing how the foundations were first laid in defense, how a continental empire was created and then lost, and finally how dynastic crisis led to the consolidation of, well, pretty absolute royal power.
Sounds like a plan. Where do we start?
Let's unpack this. Okay, so we begin with Alfred the Great. He was born into the Kingdom of Wessex, which was doing okay, relatively speaking.
All right, it was ascendant.
But the wider context was, frankly, an existential crisis. After Rome collapsed centuries earlier, Europe was fragmented, but the immediate crisis for England was this new and malicious force, the Vikings.
And crucially, they weren't just raiding anymore by this point. They were settling. By 870, they'd just effortlessly overrun Northumbria, East Anglia, Mercia. Wessex was next.
And Alfred didn't exactly have a smooth transition to power, did he?
No, not at all. He succeeded his brother Ethelred in 871, but he was chosen over Ethelred's own infant sons.
Why was that?
Purely because the crisis was so immediate. Wessex needed a battle-ready leader, like right now, to confront the Vikings pushing south. No time for a regency.
And he proved to be much more than just a warrior. He engineered this total military and administrative revolution. We hear about his reform, but the crucial technical innovation seems to be that chain of fortified towns, the burhs.
Yes, the burhs. And these weren't just temporary walls. They were a meticulously planned national defense network.
The administrative genius behind it is what was out, I think.
Absolutely. The system ensured a fort was built within about 20 miles a day's march, basically, of every Saxon settlement in Wessex.
Wow.
And this was detailed later in the Burgle Hidden. Now, this document wasn't just a list of forts. It was essentially a comprehensive financial and administrative blueprint. It assigned a precise amount of land acreage, called hide, needed to fund and maintain specific sections of each burh's wall and garrison.
So what you're describing is effectively a hyper-rational, professional bureaucracy designed purely to support a defense budget.
Pretty much. It was an incredibly sophisticated national property tax system designed decades, maybe even centuries, before similar systematic taxation popped up elsewhere.
That's incredible. And it wasn't just forts, was it? He reformed the military itself.
Right. The militia, known as the Fyrd. Before Alfred, calling up the Fyrd meant everyone left their farms.
Which could lead to famine, right? Vulnerability.
Exact. Alfred's solution was ingenious. He divided the fighting age males into 2 groups. One was active duty, constantly training, garrisoning the burh.
Okay.
The other was home defense, working the land, but ready to be called out. It meant half the population could always be mobilized in an emergency, while the other half kept the kingdom fed.
Very clever. And what about the Navy? We hear about Alfred and ships.
Yes, maritime defense too. He pioneered the construction of these longer 60-oar ships. They were designed specifically to combat the deeper draft Viking longships in coastal waters.
So, laying the groundwork for England's naval tradition.
Contributing to it, certainly. Though it's fair to say the Anglo-Saxons already had a pretty strong naval tradition before him, but his designs were innovative for the threat they faced.
all this preparation, all this planning, it was really put to the test in 878, wasn't it?
Oh, man. Guthrum, the Viking leader, launched this devastating surprise attack on Alfred's court during Twelfth Night celebration. Total shock.
And Alfred was forced into hiding.
Yeah, famously hiding out in the Somerset marshes for weeks. Looked like it was all over. But he regrouped, rallied the feared, and led them to a decisive victory at the Battle of Edington later that.
A huge turn.
Absolutely. And that victory was followed by the Treaty of Wed. Now, this wasn't just a truce, it was a proper political demarcation.
It established the Danelaw.
Right, it confined Danish control to the northeast of England, basically east of the Thames-Bedford line. But crucially for Alfred, it secured him London.
And London was already important back then.
Oh, yes. A vital trading center, important mint. Alfred immediately incorporated it, began its development, fortified a huge economic consequences down the line.
You can actually see this economically, can't you, in the coins?
You really can. In the early 870s, Wessex coinage was heavily debated, full of cheaper metal. It reflects the financial strain, probably paying off Vikings constantly.
Right, the Dane guy.
Exactly. But by the late 880s, after Edington and getting London back, Alfred's mints were issuing high silver content coins back to the pre-Viking standard. The kingdom was financially solved. It's physical evidence of his success.
And here's something fascinating. The sources suggest a complete reverse. Instead of paying Danegeld,
he was extracting his own payments from the Danes in the Danelaw.
Effectively, yes. Bribes, perhaps, to stay out of their affairs, or maybe just asserting dominance. The tables had completely turned because of his organizational genius.
And this genius wasn't just military or financial. It extended to culture and law, too.
Tell us about that.
Well, his law code, it drew heavily on earlier Wessex law tradition, but also, surprisingly, on Mosaic codes from the Bible.
Interesting blend.
Very.
Yeah.
And he modeled an education system, a bit like Charlemagne's on the continent, but with a real emphasis on valuing the vernacular, old English, not just Latin.
Promoting literacy in English.
Exact. He sponsored a learned court, brought in scholars like Asser, his biographer from Wales. He personally translated works from Latin to Old English. It was about ensuring intellectual life, English identity, survive the chaos.
So ultimately, he really earned that title, the Great.
I think so. His official documents started referring to him as King of the Anglo-Saxons, uniting all the free Anglo-Saxons not under Danish rule. He laid the foundational blueprint, the conceptual groundwork for a centralized state that ensured England, as an idea, survived.
Okay, so from Alfred, the architect of survival, we leap forward about 2 centuries, and the contrast couldn't be stark. We're now looking at William the Conqueror, an agent of total and frankly brutal transformation.
Absolutely. His path to the English throne was, well, a mix of dubious legal maneuvering and just overwhelming military might.
Let's unpack that legal claim first. It rested largely on a promise supposedly made by the childless King Edward the Confessor way back in 1051.
Right, and critically, this claim isn't just found in Norman propaganda sources after. It's also attested in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle,
which was written before the conquest.
Exactly. That lends it some weight, even if the details are murky. It suggests the idea was floating around.
And then there was the oath sworn by Harold Godwinson in war, the one on the Bayeux Tapestry.
Yes, famously depicted. Harold was shipwrecked in Normandy, became William's guest, and supposedly swore an oath, perhaps under duress, to support William's claim.
Whether he meant it or not.
Irrelevant, really. William used it as rock-solid justification for invasion when Harold took the throne for himself in January 1066 after Edward died.
And by 1066, William wasn't just some minor duke. He was a serious European powerhouse.
Oh, definitely. He'd secured his own Duchy of Normandy by decisively defeating the French king Henry VI at the Battle of Vaireville in 1057. And then he conquered the large, wealthy French province of Maine in 1063.
So he had significant resources.
Immense cross-channel resources, manpower, wealth, ships ready to bring to bear for the invasion.
Which brings us to that chaotic year, 1066. It was just an absolute logistical nightmare for Harold Godwinson, wasn't it?
A triple threat, yeah. First, he had his own exiled brother, Tostig, teaming up with the fearsome Harald Hardrada, king of Norway. They landed in the north with a huge army, maybe 10,000 men, 300 ships.
And Harold had to react fast.
Incredibly fast. Marched the English army north at lightning speed, caught them completely by surprise at Stamford Bridge on September 25th. Won a stunning but utterly exhausting victory. Both Tostig and Hardrada were killed.
A brilliant victory, but
a devastating distraction. Because just 2 days later, while Harold's army was battered and recovering hundreds of miles away, William landed at Pevensey on the south coast, September 27th.
Terrible timing for Harold. And you mentioned a tactical nugget about William's landing.
Yes. The sources, particularly Norman ones, emphasize that William established a fort almost immediately upon landing at Pevensey, likely using the old Roman shore fort walls.
Why was that so important?
Well, the thinking is he was preparing for a rapid withdrawal if the initial engagement went bad, securing an escape route back to Normandy. It shows a degree of caution, maybe even anxiety, despite his confidence.
Interesting. So, on to the main event, Hastings, October 4th.
Right. Fought about 11 kilometers, maybe 7 miles, northwest of Hastings itself, near where Battle Abbey now stands. It really was the triumph of combined arms tactics.
Franco-Norman style.
Exactly. Mixed infantry, archers, and crucially disciplined heavy cavalry charges against the Anglo-Saxon reliance on the shield wall formation. Harold and his brothers were killed. The English line broke late in the day. Decisive Norman victory.
But the conquest wasn't over with Hastings, was it?
Not by a long shot. The initial seizure of the crown was actually quite cautious. William didn't march straight on London. He secured key strategic cities, first Dover, Canterbury, Winchester, isolating the capital.
And what about the English leadership?
The Witnagama, the Council of Anglo-Saxon Nobles and Bishops, had actually chosen Edward the Confessor's young great-nephew, Edgar Atheling, as king after Harold's death.
A boy king.
Yes, but with William closing in and English resistance fragmented, Edgar quickly submitted. William was crowned in Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day, 1066. Symbolic, but the real work was just beginning.
You call it the real conquest.
Because it was. A long, brutal, 6-year campaign that lasted until about 1071. William faced deep, entrenched resistance across England, especially in the West Country and the North.
And this is where we get the harrying of the North.
Exactly. His most infamous act. Faced with constant rebellion in Northumbria, William inflicted a deliberate policy of severe famine, a scorched earth camp, villages burned, crops destroyed, livestock slaughtered, utter devastation.
And we can see the long-term effects of this.
Chillingly, yet. Years later, in the Domesday Book, commissioned in 1085, large sections of Yorkshire and the north show hugely reduced land values compared to before the conquest. Many entries simply list valuable land as waste vasta est, direct evidence of the economic impact tally.
Which brings us to the Domesday Book itself, more than just a survey.
Oh, much more. Commissioned in 1085, completed in 1086. It wasn't just counting pigs and plows. It was a legal confirmation of the total transfer of power and landownership.
What was its specific purpose then?
Its primary purpose seems to have been fiscal and administrative, to determine exactly who held what land, what resources were on it, and what feudal services and taxes were owed to the crown. This was crucial for maximizing royal revenue and also potentially for securing assets during a possible succession crisis or Danish invasion threat around that time.
A snapshot of the new order and the scale of the change in land ownership.
Staggering. Of the roughly 1,400 Anglo-Saxon and Danish tenants-in-chief, the major landholders directly under the king before 1066, only 2 remained by 1086. Just 2.
Incredible. So who got the land?
William's Norman followers, his inner circle. Men like Robert de Beaumont, William de Warenne. They were granted vast estates, often strategically located to control key regions.
And secured by castles?
Immediate. The Normans brought castle-building technology initially, Motte and Bailey, soon replaced by imposing stone keeps, which became the symbol and instrument of their control across the landscape.
So it wasn't just a change of king, it was a complete societal restructuring.
Totally irreversible. The Norman Conquest brought a new administrative system, new laws, a new ruling class, a new culture, and of course the French language of the elite. This eventually blended with the Old English of the populace to create, well, the foundation of modern.
But despite this total transformation of England, where did William's own priority lie?
That's critical. He actually spent the vast majority of his time after 1066, maybe 4/5 of his reign, back in France, in Normandy.
Really? Why?
He clearly views Normandy as the core of his dominions, his homeland. England was vital, yes, but perhaps primarily as the source of the revenue and manpower needed to defend his continental possession against the French king and other rivals.
Interesting perspective. England as the treasury for Normandy.
In many ways, yes. And when he died in 1087, he split his succession. His eldest son, Robert, got Normandy. The second surviving son, William Rufus, got England. This inevitably led to years of conflict between the two territories, undoing the unity he'd forged. Right, so jumping forward again, past the immediate aftermath of William's sons squabbling, we land in the mid-12th century. William's legacy had eventually fractured, leading to civil war in England.
The anarchy.
Exactly. A messy 20-year period of civil conflict after William's grandson, Henry III, died without a clear male heir. His daughter, Empress Matilda, fought Stephen of Blois for the throne. It ended when Henry II, Matilda's son, acceded in 1154.
And Henry II was just a real force of nature.
An absolute dynamo.
Yeah.
Energetic, intelligent, incredibly pragmatic. And he didn't just inherit it. Through his mother Matilda, Normandy and England, and his father Geoffrey, Anjou and Maine, and crucially his strategic marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine.
Who brought Aquitaine, a huge chunk of southwest.
Precisely. He commanded this enormous political entity we call the Angevin Empire. It stretched from the Scottish border down through England, Wales, Ireland, and huge swaths of western France. Normandy, Anjou, Maine, Touraine, Aquitaine.
So he controlled more French territory than the actual king of France.
By a significant margin, yes. It was this vast, complex, often unstable collection of territory.
But his most enduring achievement, you'd argue, was back in England with the law.
I think so. His legal and administrative revolution was aimed squarely at increasing central royal control and replacing the often arbitrary, inconsistent local justice systems with the king's justice, available to all free men.
And the key reforms here were the Assizes of Clarendon in 11.
Yes, Clarendon and also Northampton later. These streamlined the judicial system and established royal courts with traveling justices.
And this is where we get the technical nugget about the juries.
Exactly. The Assizes didn't invent juries wholesale, but they massively expanded their use, particularly in land disputes. They allowed 12 local knights or freeholders to recognize, essentially, testify under oath to the facts of a case, particularly about rightful possession of land.
So replacing trial by ordeal or combat?
Increasingly, yes, especially for property. Henry introduced specific legal mechanisms, writs like the Grand Assize and the Assize of Novel Dessays. A subject could purchase one of these writs from the royal chancery.
Purchase a legal document.
Yes, and that writ essentially guaranteed them a hearing in the king's centrally organized court using this jury of recognition, bypassing potentially corrupt or biased local feudal lords' courts.
That's a huge shift in power.
Massive. It nationalized disputes over land and property, positioning the crown as the ultimate source of justice and authority. People started looking to the king, not their local lord, for fairness.
And financially, did he tighten things up there too?
He did. The Carta Barum in 1166 was essentially a survey. Henry wanted to know exactly how many knights each of his tenants-in-chief, the baron, actually owed him in military service compared to what they claimed they owed based on older, possibly outdated quotas.
Trying to close loopholes.
Precise. By getting an accurate count, the royal exchequer could maximize its revenue from scutage the payment barons made, instead of providing knights for military campaigns. More accurate books meant more reliable income for the crown.
And he was conscious of projecting power too. Image management.
Very much so. After the chaos of the anarchy, he needed to show strength and stability. He undertook lavish building projects. The enormous stone keep at Dover Castle is a prime example, dominating the Channel Cross. These were powerful acts of propaganda in stone.
But his reign wasn't all smooth sailing. There was the Becket conflict.
Ah, yeah, Thomas Becket. This cast a long shadow. Henry promoted his close friend and very efficient Lord Chancellor, Becket, to be Archbishop of Canterbury in 1162.
Expecting him to remain loyal to the crown's interests.
Exactly. He wanted an archbishop who would help him assert royal authority over the church, especially regarding the trial of clergymen accused of crimes, criminous clerk.
But Becket changed.
Immediately and traumatically. He resigned as chancellor and became this zealous defender of church privileges, clashing bitterly with Henry over the constitutions of Clarendon, 1164, which aimed to limit those privileges.
Particularly the issue of trying clergy in royal courts.
That was the main sticking. Becket refused, fled into exile. The conflict dragged on for years.
Until his murder.
Yes, the infamous murder in Canterbury Cathedral in 1170. 4 of Henry's knights, possibly taking an angry outburst from the king, literally, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" went to Canterbury and killed Becket right by the altar.
And the fallout?
Catastrophic for Henry's reputation. Even though he performed public penance later, barefoot in the snow, the murder turned Becket into a martyr, a saint almost overnight. It was a massive propaganda victory for the church and forever tarnished Henry's reign.
While all this was happening, he was also getting involved in Ireland?
Yes. The long-term Irish intervention kicked off under Henry. It started when an Irish king, Dermot MacMurrough of Leinster, was exiled and sought Henry's permission to recruit Norman knights from Wales to help him regain his kingdom.
Henry allowed it.
He did. Knights like Richard Strongbow Fitzgilbert went over and were extremely successful, carving out lordships for themselves. Too successful, in fact.
Why too successful?
Henry got worried they were setting up independent kingdoms, so he had to intervene personally in 1171, landing with a large army to assert direct crown control over their conquests.
And the result?
The Treaty of Windsor in 1175. It didn't conquer all of Ireland, but it formally cemented English royal control over Leinster, Dublin, Waterford, and other areas. It established a pattern of English involvement and overlordship that would last for centuries.
So huge successes legally, territorially, but his later years were troubled.
Deeply troubled. Plagued by family civil war. Henry's sheer energy and desire for control created immense tension with his 4 surviving sons. Henry the young king, crowned in his father's lifetime but given no real power. Richard, later the Lionheart. Geoffrey, and John, later King John.
They rebelled against him.
Repeatedly. The biggest was the Great Revolt of 1173-1174, where the sons allied with their mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, who Henry had sided, and even the King of France, Louis VII.
Why did Eleanor join them?
She had her own vast territories in Aquitaine and resented Henry's interference and likely his infidelity. She actively encouraged her son's ambition.
How did Henry handle it?
He eventually crushed the rebellion. showing his military skill. But the cost was high. He imprisoned Eleanor for the rest of his reign, essentially. The family strife never truly ended, though. Sons plotted against him, against each other.
And his death.
He died in 1189, fighting yet another rebellion led by Richard, this time allied with the new French king, Philip II. The story goes that he finally collapsed, reputedly heartbroken, after learning that his youngest and favorite son, John, had also joined the rebellion against a final, bitter act of familial betrayal.
So after Henry II's turbulent end, we get his most famous son, Richard III, the Lion. He really cultivated that warrior persona.
Oh, absolutely. All the sources agree exceptionally tall for the era, over 6 feet. Apparently handsome, and he had earned his nickname Coeur de Lion through military exploits in Aquitaine long before he became king. He was bred for war.
But his focus wasn't really England, was it?
Overwhelmingly continental, yes. He famously spent only about 6 months, maybe less, actually in England during his entire 10-year reign.
6 months and 10 years.
That's the estimate. He spoke little English. He really viewed England primarily as a source of funds, a cash cow, frankly, and manpower for his main interest, defending his French dominions and, above all, crusading.
Which brings us to the Third Crusade, 1190-11. This dominated his early...
Completely. Saladin had recaptured Jerusalem in 1187, a huge shock to Christendom. Richard was utterly committed to retake. His first act as king was basically to raise enormous sums of money for the crusade.
How did he sum?
Mainly through the Saladin tithe, a special tax initiated by his father, but rigorously collected by Richard. He also sold off offices, titles, lands, extorted money from the church, anything to fund the expedition.
And on the way to the Holy Land, he conquered Cyprus almost exactly.
Almost, yeah. It's one of his most tangible, lasting bizarre. A storm scattered his fleet en route. Some ships carrying his sister Joan and his bride-to-be Berengaria of Navarre were shipwrecked on Cyprus.
Okay.
The self-proclaimed ruler of Cyprus, Isaac Comnene, basically took them prisoner and refused to release. Richard was furious. He landed his army, quickly defeated Isaac, and seized the entire very wealthy and strategically important island.
So Cyprus became a crusader.
Exactly. He later sold it to the Knights Templar. Then it became a Lusignan kingdom. It remained a crucial Christian stronghold in the eastern Mediterranean for decades, supporting later crusades, arguably more strategically significant in the long run than anything he achieved in Palestine.
And his campaigns in the Holy Land itself, how did they go?
Militarily, often brilliant. He arrived at the long-running siege of Acre, and his presence helped force its surrender in 1191. Though that was followed by the highly controversial execution of nearly 3,000 Muslim prisoners after Saladin delayed meeting the truce terms. Definitely. But then he led the Crusader armies south and won a decisive victory against Saladin's much larger forces at the Battle of Arsuf. Masterful use of disciplined infantry protecting crossbowmen, followed by perfectly timed heavy cavalry charges. It shattered Saladin's aura of invincibility and opened the route towards Jerusalem.
But he never took Jerusalem.
No, they got within sight of the city, twice. But Richard, though personally keen, was overruled by his ally. They argued they couldn't hold it, even if they took it. And Richard was also getting increasingly worried news from England.
What kind of news?
His brother John was plotting against him, conspiring with King Philip II of France, who had already left the crusade and returned home to start nibbling at Richard's French territories.
So Richard had to cut a deal.
Yes, he negotiated the Treaty of Jaffa with Saladin in 1192. A 3-year truce. Christians kept the coastline they'd conquered, and crucially, unarmed Christian pilgrims were guaranteed safe access to Jerusalem and the Holy Site. But the city itself remained under Muslim control.
So he essentially bankrupted England for a mission he didn't fully... Is that fair?
It's a harsh assessment, but there's truth in it. He achieved significant military successes, restored Christian morale, secured the coast, but the ultimate goal wasn't met, and the financial cost was enormous.
And his return journey was disastrous.
Utterly. Trying to get back quickly and discreetly through Central Europe, he was shipwrecked again, then captured near Vienna by Duke Leopold V of Austria.
Why did Leopold capture?
Bad blood from the crusade. Richard had insulted him at Acre by tearing down his banner. Leopold handed him over to his enemy, the Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI, who was also allied with King Philip II to France. Perfect opportunity for them.
So he was held for ransom?
Yes, for over a year. The price was astronomical. 100,000 silver marks, maybe 2 or 3 times the annual income of the English crown at the time. England was bled dry through extraordinary taxation to pay it. His mother, Eleanor, was instrumental in raising it.
And when he finally got back?
He arrived back in England briefly in 1194. Surprisingly, he forgave John for his plotting.
Why forgive?
Pragmatism, probably.
Yeah.
He couldn't afford a renewed civil war while Philip II was actively seizing his French land. He needed unity, or at least John neutralized. He basically said, he's only a child who has had evil counselor. Then he promptly left England again, for good this time.
So the rest of his reign, 1194 to 1190, was just war against France.
Entirely consumed by recovering the territories and castles Philip had taken during his captivity in constant grinding warfare across Normandy and the Vexin region.
And this is where he built Chateau Gaillard.
Yes, his most famous non-crusade strategic, a massive state-of-the-art fortress built incredibly quickly on the River Seine in Normandy, designed using cutting-edge military architecture, some perhaps inspired by Crusader Castle, to block the French advance on Rouen, the Norman capital. It was a masterpiece of defense.
But he didn't live to see its full potential.
No, a 5-year truce with Philip was finally agreed in early 1199, but just weeks later in March, Richard was besieging a minor castle, Châlus-Chabrol in Limoges, apparently over a dispute about treasure trove.
A minor revolt.
Seems so. He was walking around the siege lines without full armor and was shot in the shoulder by a crossbow bolt fired by a boy from the battle. The wound turned gangrenous.
And he died.
He died about 11 days later, on April 6, 1199. Apparently, he forgave the crossbowman before he died.
So his legacy, a great warrior, but
A military genius, undoubtedly. A charismatic leader of men in battle. But as a king of England, his reign was defined almost entirely by absence in war. Funded by England but fought elsewhere. The sources note it was bereft of any signature efforts to reform the judiciary or develop domestic policy in England, unlike his father. He left the kingdom financially strained and facing an unresolved conflict with France. Right, before we leap forward again, maybe just a quick bridge. Richard's obsession with France and his death left the Angevin Empire vulnerable. His brother John inherited it all.
And John famously lost most of it?
Exactly. Within 5 years, by 1204, King Philip II of France had conquered Normandy, Anjou, Maine, the heartlands of the Angevin Empire on the continent. England became permanently separated.
How did that loss change England?
Profoundly. It forced the English monarchy and nobility to focus inward, on England itself. Their continental ambitions were drastically curtailed. This loss of land and prestige arguably contributed directly to the baronial discontent that led John to seal Magna Carta in 1215.
Constraining royal power.
Yes, and setting a precedent. It also meant future kings had to engage much more closely with the English nobility and eventually with Parliament as it developed over the next century. The power dynamic shifted. The seeds of later conflicts, like the Wars of the Roses, were arguably sown here, with powerful noble houses becoming kingmakers or kingbreakers when royal authority faltered.
Okay, so that context of an island kingdom with powerful nobles and developed sets the stage for...
Exactly. We jump now to the mid-15th century and the Wars of the Rose. This wasn't foreign invasion, but brutal internal conflict born out of the weak and intermittent rule of Henry VI, a Lancastrian king, and the competing claims of the Plantagenet lineage.
Lancaster versus... And the Yorkist claim came through Edward V's and...
Yes. The Yorkists claimed descent through Lionel, Duke of Clarence, who was the elder surviving son of Edward III, compared to John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, from whom Henry VI descended. So a technically stronger claim by primogeniture, though complicated by female lines.
And Edward V's rise was violent?
Extremely. After his father, Richard, Duke of York, initially pressed the claim and was killed at the Battle of Wakefield in 1460, the cause fell to his charismatic 18-year-old son, Edward.
Yes.
And he was immediately successful. Won a key victory at Mortimer's Cross that marched on London and was acclaimed king. Then came the Battle of Towton in March 1460.
Incredibly.
Staggeringly so. Fought in a snowstorm. Our sources, while potentially exaggerating, suggest casualties could have been as high as 28,000 men killed. Just a horrific slaughter, perhaps the bloodiest battle ever fought on English soil.
And Edward won decisively.
Utterly crushed the Lancastrian army. He essentially legitimized his subsequent accession not just by his birthright, but explicitly by right of conquest on the battlefield. Might made right.
What was he like as a person? The sources paint quite a picture.
They do. Exceptionally tall for the age, apparently 6'3" or 6'4", handsome, very charming when he wanted to be, an affable manner, but also a superb military commander, famously never lost a battle he personally commanded.
But not exactly an intellectual.
No, the sources suggest he much preferred worldly pursuit, hunting, feasting, fine clothes, and he had numerous mistresses, but he was sharp, politically astute, and very good at projecting an image of kingship and power.
And this extended into finance. He was innovative there.
Highly innovative, and focused on making the crown financially independent, especially independent of Parliament. This is key. He was one of the first kings to really treat the crown lands like a private business portfolio.
How so? Privatization?
In a way, yes. Instead of just leasing out royal estates for fixed rents, he often hired professional stewards or receivers to manage the lands directly and collect all the profits for the crown. Much more lucrative.
And he used other methods, too.
Oh, yeah. He invested his own money in trade ventures, particularly the wool trade. And critically, he developed a separate financial system working through his personal household, often called the chamber system, or related to the Great Wardrobe, rather than relying solely on the traditional, more bureaucratic exchequer.
Why was that important?
It gave him much more direct personal control over royal finance. Less red tape, faster access to cash, bypassed traditional checks and balance. Very effective for a king who needed to act decisively.
And benevolent, what were they exactly?
Wow, benevolent. Officially described sometimes as gifts or payments to avoid military service. But the reality, according to the sources, is that they were highly coercive. Essentially forced loans or levies extracted from wealthy individuals, merchants, and city guilds.
So not really voluntary goodwill.
Not usually, no. It was a way to raise significant cash without needing parliamentary approval for taxation. Very effective financially, but it definitely contributed to a reputation for avarice and could cause resentment.
Now, the major political upheaval of his first reign came from his marriage.
Yes. The controversial marriage. In 1464, he secretly married Elizabeth Woodville. She was English, a widow of a Lancastrian knight, killed fighting against the Yorkists, and crucially, a commoner by royal standard.
Why was this such a big deal?
Huge deal. His most powerful supporter, Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, known as the Kingmaker, was actively negotiating a prestigious marriage alliance for Edward with a French princess at the time. Edward, marrying a low-born Lancastrian widow behind his back, was seen as a massive political blunder and a personal insult to Warwick.
But Edward stuck by it.
He did. When the marriage was revealed, he defended it vigorously. It showed, as one source puts it, that he was very much his own man, willing to prioritize his personal choice, or perhaps infatuation, over political expediency and the advice of his most powerful ally. It also led him to promote Elizabeth's large family, the Woodvilles, which further alienated the established nobility like Warwick.
And this directly led to Warwick turning against it.
Directly. Warwick felt slighted and increasingly marginalized by the Woodville influence. He eventually conspired with Edward's own ambitious and disgruntled brother, George, Duke of Clarence. They stirred up trouble, even using rumors that Edward himself was illegitimate.
And they actually captured Edward.
Briefly, yes, in 1469. It was a shock, but Edward managed to regain control. Warwick and Clarence then fled, eventually making the ultimate political U-turn. They allied with the exiled Lancastrian, led by Margaret of Anjou, Henry VI's wife.
So the Kingmaker switched sides.
He did. They invaded in 1470, Edward was forced to flee abroad, and they briefly restored Henry VI to the throne, the readeption.
But Edward came back.
Yes, with support from Burgundy. He landed in 1471 and showed his military genius again. In quick succession, he won two decisive battles. Barnet, where Warwick himself was killed.
The Kingmaker finally fell.
And Tewkesbury, where the main Lancastrian force was destroyed, and Henry VI's son and heir, Edward of Westminster, was killed either in the battle or shortly after.
And Henry VI?
With his heir dead, Henry VI was no longer used. He died in the Tower of London that same night, almost certainly murdered on Edward VI's order. The Lancastrian threat was effectively extinct.
So Edward's second reign, after 1471, more stable.
Much more placid domestically, yes, and marked by financial stability, especially after his expedition to France in 1475.
He invaded France.
He did, reviving old claim, but instead of fighting a costly war, he negotiated the Treaty of Picquigny with King Louis the Other. Louis basically paid Edward off with a large initial sum and a substantial annual pension, or tribute.
So he got French money without fighting.
Exact. A very shrewd deal. It ensured Edward was financially independent of Parliament for the rest of his reign. He never had to ask them for money again.
But despite this success, his end was premature.
Yes. His later years were marked by increasing indulgence. Sources talk about his growing obesity, his continued womanizing, perhaps excessing in drinking. His health declined sharply.
And he died.
Died suddenly in April 1483, aged only 40, probably from illness, maybe pneumonia or related complications exacerbated by his lifestyle. He left the throne to his 12-year-old son, Edward V.
Setting the stage for another crisis.
Immediately. His death left a power vacuum and unleashed the ambition of his own brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, leading directly to the brief, turbulent reign of Richard III and the end of the Plantagenet dynasty.
Okay, so the chaos following Edward V's death, Richard III's usurpation of his nephews, the princes in the Tower, this provided the opportunity for an unlikely contender. Henry Tudor, later...
Very unlikely. His claim to the throne was, frankly, paper thin, really tenuous.
How so? Where did his claim come from?
His main claim was through his mother, Margaret Beaufort. She was descended from John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, Edward III's son, but through Gaunt's Beaufort line, which originated from an illegitimate relationship.
Yeah, they were legitimate.
They were, yes, by Richard II, and later confirmed by Parliament under Henry IV. But crucially, the act of legitimation specifically included a clause barring the Beauforts and their descendants from ever inheriting the throne.
So technically barred from succession.
Technically, yes. His father's side, Edmund Tudor, Earl of Richmond, offered a connection to Welsh royalty, and through his mother, Catherine of Valois, widow of Henry V, a link back to the Lancastrian royal house, but no direct claim to the throne itself. His path was almost entirely down to his mother's relentless ambition and ultimately military victory.
And he spent years in exile.
14 years, mostly in Brittany and then France, constantly under threat from Yorkist kings trying to capture him. He became the focus of disillusioned Lancastrians and Yorkists, alienated by Richard III.
Until he invaded in 1485.
Yes, landed in Wales, gathered support, and met Richard III at Bosworth Field on August 22nd, 1485.
And the key moment there was the Stanley defection.
Absolutely critical. Lord Thomas Stanley and his brother Sir William Stanley commanded large force. Thomas was Henry's stepfather, but he'd hesitated to commit. At the crucial moment, as Richard III launched a desperate charge aimed directly at Henry, the Stanleys finally intervened on Henry's side. Richard was surrounded, pulled from his horse, and killed.
So Henry won the crown by right of conquest, just like Edward IV.
He claimed the throne on the battlefield, but the key to his success wasn't just winning Bosworth. It was how he immediately moved to consolidate power and establish legitimacy.
What were his first moves?
Political security first. He immediately ordered the imprisonment of the young Earl of Warwick, George, Duke of Clarence's son, who was the most prominent surviving male Yorkist claimant. Locked him away in the Tower.
Taking rivals off the board.
Precise. Second, dynastic union. He honored the promise made before his invasion to marry Elizabeth of York, Edward IV's eldest daughter.
Uniting the houses of Lancaster.
Symbolically, yes. The marriage took place in January 1486. It helped reconcile some Yorkists, and crucially, the birth of their son, Prince Arthur, later that year, provided a male heir embodying both lines. The Tudor rose emblem reflects this union.
But then came that really shocking legal move, the backdate.
Yes, this was extraordinary. Henry persuaded his first parliament to declare that his reign had officially begun on August 21st, 1485, the day before the Battle of Bosworth,
making anyone who fought for the legitimate king, Richard III, at Bosworth,
technically guilty of treason against King Henry VII.
Wow, the sheer audacity.
It was a stunning display of political control and legal manipulation. It meant that all those who fought for Richard III, the anointed king at the time, only held their lives and lands by Henry's grace and pardon, not by right. It instantly put the nobility in his debt and fear, a terrifying assertion of sovereign power.
Did this climate of fear continue? He faced challenges, didn't
he? He did. Constant undercurrents of Yorkist plots and pretenders, most famously Lambert Simnel, who pretended to be the imprisoned Earl of Warwick, and then Perkin Warbeck, who claimed for years to be Richard, Duke of York, the younger of the princes in the Tower.
How did Henry deal with...
Simnel's rebellion was crushed militarily in 1487. Warbeck was a longer-running, more internationally supported threat, but Henry eventually captured him too. These challenges, though, convinced Henry of the absolute need for internal security and intelligence.
He built a spy network.
A comprehensive one, yes. He became obsessed with knowing what his nobles and potential enemies were thinking and doing. His agents infiltrated households, intercepted messages, even reportedly used information gleaned from confessors. He wanted to stifle plots long before they could serve, created an atmosphere of paranoia, perhaps, but it was effective.
So, security and legitimacy were key. What about finance? He has a reputation there.
Oh, yes. Wary of costly wars like his predecessors, and deeply suspicious of relying on Parliament, which could make demands, Henry focused obsessively on swelling the royal coffers and made the crown financially independent. His financial legacy is huge.
But he gained a reputation for avarice.
Extreme avarice, yes, especially in his later years. To achieve financial solvency, he employed two fiercely efficient and consequently fiercely hated ministers, Sir Richard Empson and Edmund Dudley.
What did Empson and Dudley do that made them so...
They were masters of fiscal extortion, operating largely through revived or newly empowered prerogative court, like the council learned in the law. They systematically revived long-forgotten, unenforced feudal laws and obligations solely to levy enormous fines against nobles and wealthy citizens for minor, often technical infractions.
Finding legal loopholes extract money.
Exactly. They investigated land titles, enforced outdated regulations, manipulated bonds and recognizances. Essentially, IOUs nobles were forced to sign to guarantee future good behavior, forfeitable on flimsy pretext. They even allegedly invented new laws and crimes purely to seize wealth for the king. It was ruthless, legally dubious, but incredibly effective at filling the trick.
So he achieved his goal, but at a cost to his popularity.
Absolutely. By the time he died in 1509, he was probably one of the wealthiest monarchs in Europe, but also thoroughly disliked, even hated, for his perceived greed and the oppressive methods of Empson and Dudley, who were promptly executed by his son, Henry VIII, as a popular gesture.
But what was the long-term result?
He had undeniably achieved his primary goal. He passed on a kingdom that was internally stable, largely pacified, internationally respected, financially solvent with a substantial surplus in the treasury, and, most importantly, he had established a secure dynasty. He laid the groundwork for the Tudor Golden Age, even if he did it through paranoia and avarice. Right, that stable, solvent foundation allowed Henry VIII's second son, Henry VIII, to burst onto the scene in 1509 with enormous potential.
He was the second son, the spare.
He was. His older brother, Arthur, Prince of Wales, was groomed for kingship, but died suddenly in 1502. This meant young Henry, who had initially been intended perhaps for a career in the church, received a different kind of education.
A broader education.
Yes, a liberal Renaissance humanist education focused on theology, languages, Latin, French, some Spanish, rhetoric, history, mathematics, and crucially, music. He was a genuinely talented composer and musician, less focused perhaps on the hard grind of statecraft initially planned for Arthur.
So when he became king in 1509, the mood was up.
Immensely so. His early reign was characterized by hope, joy, relief from his father's oppressive taxation. He was young, just 17, tall, athletic, handsome, charismatic. He deliberately cultivated this image of a chivalrous, generous, warrior king, modeling his court on medieval ideals, but with a Renaissance flair.
And he married Catherine of Aragon, his brother Arthur's widow.
Yes, very quickly after becoming king. Required a papal dispensation, but it cemented the Spanish alliance his father had sought. He was widely popular, spent lavishly on tournament, masks, hunting, and war, initially forgiving his father's debts and executing Empson Dudley, a very different vibe from Henry VII.
But the shadow hanging over the reign became the succession.
The Great Obsession. Catherine of Aragon endured multiple pregnancies, but they resulted in miscarriages, stillbirths, or infants who died soon after birth. Only one child survived to adulthood, Mary, born in 1516.
A daughter, not the desired male heir.
Exact. By the mid-1520s, Catherine was past her childbearing years, and Henry became convinced, perhaps genuinely believing it was God's judgment for marrying his brother's widow, that he needed a new wife to secure a male heir and the Tudor dynasty.
And his eye fell on Anne Boleyn.
Yes. Anne, one of Catherine's ladies-in-waiting, was captivating, intelligent, and crucially refused to become Henry's mistress like her sister Mary had been. She held out for marriage. This refusal, combined with Henry's dynastic obsession and infatuation, drove him to seek an annulment of his marriage to Catherine from the Pope.
Which the Pope refused or stalled on.
Stalled, largely due to political pressure.
Yeah.
Catherine's nephew was the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, whose troops had recently sacked Rome and effectively held Pope Clement VII captive. The Pope couldn't easily grant an annulment that would disgrace the emperor's aunt.
So Henry's chief minister, Cardinal Wolsey, failed to secure.
Yes, the failure of Wolsey's legatine court, held in England in 1529 to hear the case, led directly to Wolsey's downfall and disgrace. Henry blamed him.
And this pushed Henry towards a more radical solution.
It did. Advised by figures like Thomas Cromwell and Thomas Cranmer, Henry embarked on the path that led to the seismic break with Rome.
Declaring himself head of the church.
Precisely. Through a series of parliamentary acts between 1532 and 1534, culminating in the Act of Supremacy in 1534, Henry effectively severed England's legal and financial ties to the papacy and declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England on earth.
What was the legal thinking behind the act and restraint of
that act, passed in 1533, was crucial. Its preamble famously declared that this realm of England is an empire, governed by one supreme head and king. This wasn't claiming new territory. It was asserting total legal sovereignty within England. It meant final legal authority rested with the king, not any foreign power like the Pope. No appeals could go to Rome. This legally enabled Archbishop Cranmer to finally annul Henry's marriage to Catherine, allowing him to marry the already pregnant Anne.
So it was about the divorce, but also about ultimate power.
Absolutely. And financial power, too. Declaring himself supreme head allowed Henry, guided by Cromwell, to begin the dissolution of the monasteries, starting around 1536.
Seizing the church's wealth.
Immense wealth. Land, property, gold, silver, transferred from the church to the crown over the next few years. This was partly driven by genuine reformist ideas about monastic corruption, but primarily it was a massive asset grab that funded Henry's government and foreign policy for years and enriched many of his supporters who bought the lands cheap.
Was Henry himself a Protestant theologian?
Not really, no. He remained broadly Catholic in his personal beliefs throughout his life. He defended traditional doctrines like transubstantiation, enforced clerical celibacy after Anne Boleyn's fall. The break was primarily political and jurisdictional, not initially driven by Protestant theology like Luther's or Calvin. He wanted Catholic practice, but under his control, not the Pope. Though inevitably, the break opened the door for genuine Protestant reformers like Cranmer to push things further.
But this assertion of power came with tyranny.
Increasingly so, yes. The Treason Act of 1534 made it treason, punishable by death, merely to speak against the Act of Supremacy, or the king's new title, or his marriages. It required an oath accepting the supremacy.
Leading to high-profile executions?
Yes. Figures respected across Europe, like his former chancellors Sir Thomas More and Bishop John Fisher, were executed in 1535 for refusing the oath. It sent a chilling message. Absolute conformity was demanded. Opposition, even based on conscience, meant death.
And then there's the story of his physical decline impacting his personality, the jousting accident.
Yes, the famous accident in 1536. He suffered a heavy fall during a joust, possibly reopening an old leg injury or causing a new one. This injury seems to have developed into a painful, chronic ulcer on his leg that never properly healed.
And this had lasting effects.
Immense effects, according to many sources and historians. The constant, debilitating pain, coupled with reduced mobility, likely contributed significantly to his weight gain. He became morbidly obese in his later years, and crucially to a dramatic shift in his personality.
From the cheerful prince to me.
To the irritable, suspicious, unpredictable, often cruel tyrant we tend to remember from his later portraits and acts. Chronic pain can drastically alter mood and judgment. It's argued this physical decline mirrored and perhaps accelerated his descent into political paranoia and tyranny, leading to the executions of wives like Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, and ministers like Cromwell himself.
So a complex legacy legacy. Personal motives, tyranny, but also monumental change.
Undeniable. Despite the deeply personal drivers and the brutal method, Henry's decisions made him arguably the single most powerful English monarch up to that. Holding supreme authority over both state and church gave him unprecedented power. He fundamentally, irrevocably changed England's religious identity, its relationship with Europe, its financial structures through the dissolution, and the very nature of English kingship. And that unprecedented power, that dual authority, was immediately transferred upon Henry VIII's death in January 1547 to his son, Edward VI, the long-sought legitimate male heir.
Born to Jane Seymour.
Yes, Henry's third wife, in 1537. Jane Seymour sadly died just days after Edward's birth from complications. But Edward was healthy, intelligent, and crucially male.
But he exceeded as a child, only 9 years old.
Exactly. Which meant his short reign, from 1547 to 1553, was inevitably dominated by others ruling in his name. A minority rule, managed by a regency council, but effectively led by two successive protectors.
Who were they?
First, his maternal uncle, Edward Seymour, who quickly became Duke of Somerset and Lord Protector, 1547-1549. Somerset was ambitious, genuinely held some reformist Protestant beliefs, but struggled.
Struggled with what?
Major problem. Financial chaos inherited from Henry VIII, exacerbated by Somerset's own policies like aggressive currency debasement, mixing cheaper metals into silver coins, which caused crippling inflation. Plus, he continued the costly and ultimately unsuccessful wars in Scotland, the Rough Wooing.
Rough Wooing.
That was the rather aggressive name given to England's military attempts under Henry VIII and Somerset to force a marriage treaty between the young Edward VI and the even younger Mary, Queen of Scots, to unite the crown. It failed and just bred resentment.
So Somerset's authority collapsed.
Yes, undermined by financial instability, the failed war, and crucially widespread social unrest in 1549. This allowed his main rival on the council, John Dudley, Earl of Warwick, later Duke of Northumberland, to seize power in late 1549, eventually having Somerset arrested and executed for alleged new plot. Northumberland then dominated the government from 1550 until Edward's death.
But during this period, under both protectors, but especially Northumberland, the religious changes accelerated.
Yes, Edward's reign is when England fully established evangelical Protestantism as the state religion, going much further than Henry VIII ever intended.
Driven by figures like Archbishop Cranmer.
Cranmer was key. Under his guidance, and with the backing of the protectors and the young king himself, English completely replaced Latin in church service. Chantry, chapels endowed for prayers for the dead, were abolished. Priests were allowed to marry.
And the Book of Common Prayer.
Crucial. The first version, introduced in 1549, was already a major shift, standardizing worship in English. But the second, more radical version of 1552 really pushed the liturgy firmly towards continental Protestantism. Zwinglian and Calvinist influences are clear, especially regarding the it denied transubstantiation.
And iconoclasts stripping the churches.
Yes, state-sponsored iconoclasm became widespread. Royal injunctions ordered the removal and destruction of religious images, statues, stained glass windows depicting saints, stone altars replaced by wooden communion tables. Much of the medieval visual culture of English churches was destroyed, along with considerable wealth and plate investments confiscated by the crown.
Was the young King Edward personally invested in this, or just going along?
The evidence suggests he was personally and very seriously invested. He'd been educated by Protestant tutors like Richard Cox and John Cheek. By age 11 or 12, contemporary accounts show him taking detailed notes on sermons, displaying a rigorous, almost precocious understanding of and adherence to the Reformed faith.
Any specific examples?
There's a famous anecdote where, during the drafting of his coronation oaths or similar document, the 11-year-old Edward himself supposedly took a pen and actively crossed out references to the saints, insisting they be removed. It indicates a fiercely committed personal theological direction. Had he lived, England might have become irreversibly Protestant much earlier and more thoroughly.
But this rapid radical shift caused problems, major unrest in
Huge problems. That year saw the most severe bout of widespread civil disobedience in the entire 16th century. It was a perfect storm of religious discontent and economic hardship.
2 major rebellions.
Yes. In the West Country, Devon and Cornwall, the Prayer Book Rebellion erupted. This was a potent mix. Fury among the largely conservative population over the imposition of the new English prayer book and the abolition of traditional Catholic rituals, combined with grievances over taxes and agrarian issues like enclosure of common land. How very serious. Major sieges, pitched battles. It was brutally suppressed by mercenary troops, with estimates of up to 5,000 Cornish and Devon rebels killed.
And the other rebellion.
At the exact same time, Kett's rebellion broke out in East Anglia, particularly Norfolk. This one was focused primarily on economic issues, specifically protesting against illegal enclosure of common lands by gentry landlords, but it also had religious undertones and demands for better local governance.
Also suppressed.
Yes, also brutally, by forces under John Dudley himself. These twin revolts, shaking the kingdom to its core, demonstrated the deep divisions caused by the rapid changes and the fragility of the state under Somerset's control. They directly contributed to his downfall later that year.
So Edward's reign was short, transformative, but also chaotic in his death.
He fell ill in early 1553, likely with tuberculosis or a similar pulmonary infection. It became clear he was dying, aged only 15.
And he tried to alter the succession.
Yeah. Knowing his heir under Henry VIII's will was his devoutly Catholic half-sister Mary, Edward became determined to prevent her from inheriting and undoing the Protestant Reformation he felt he had secured.
So he devised his own plan.
In his final months, working closely with Northumberland, who also had much to lose if Mary came to power, Edward drafted My Device for the Succession. This document bypassed both Mary and his other half-sister Elizabeth, settling the crown instead on the Protestant Lady Jane Grey.
Who was Jane Grey?
She was Edward's cousin, granddaughter of Henry VIII's younger sister Mary. Crucially, she was also recently married to Northumberland's son, Guildford Dudley.
So a last-ditch effort to secure the Protestant future.
Exactly. A final, intensely political act by a dying teenage king, driven by his own strong religious convictions and likely heavily influenced by Northumberland's political maneuvering, trying to ensure the continuation of the Reformed Church he championed. It was a bold move, but ultimately, as we know, it failed within days of his death in July 1553. #outro. So looking back across these 8 reigns, from Alfred to Edward VI, that common thread really is undeniable, as every major foundational advance, every significant administrative or legal shift seems to have been born out of profound crisis.
Yeah, it really jumps out. Viking incursions driving Alfred's.
The complete societal overthrow forcing William's Doomsday Book consolidation.
The Civil War background to Henry II's legal centralization, and again with Edward IV.
And then the dynastic fragility haunting the Tudors, driving Henry II's financial paranoia, and Henry VIII's break with Rome. Crisis seems to be the engine of change here.
And the results were these foundational shifts we've talked. Alfred creating the kind of defensive and administrative.
William overlaying it with that new feudal structure. The language, all confirmed by that revolutionary Doomsday Survey.
Henry II nationalizing justice through things like the Grand Assize, making the King's Court supreme.
Henry VIII ensuring financial solve, even if through pretty ruthless avenues.
And Henry VIII completely redefining sovereignty, declaring England an empire, taking control of the church. Massive shift.
And these weren't just abstract policy decisions made in comfortable office. The sources really bring home how personal and often agonizing these moments were for the rulers themselves.
Right, you can almost picture Alfred hiding out in the Somerset marshes wondering if it's all over.
Or Henry II hearing that his favorite son, John, had finally betrayed him. The sheer bitterness of that.
Henry II, after 14 years in exile, constantly looking over his shoulder for assassins or plots, even after crown.
Or Henry VIII, wrestling with that constant debilitating leg pain in his later years, likely warping his judgment and temper. Their personal crises, their fears, their ambition, directly shapes the legal and financial structures that, we still interact with in some ways today.
Which leads us perfectly to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider. We've seen these kings defined by absolute necessity, and often, frankly, by terrifying ruthlessness.
The established centralized statehood, yes, but through a potent mix of genius, complex governance, and sheer brutal force.
So the question is, if you had to bet your life on if you had to live as a subject under one of these 8 monarchs during their period of greatest crisis, whose particular blend of genius, governance, and let's face it, would you choose to see your kingdom and yourself?
Would it be the systematic architect of survival, Alfred? Maybe the energetic legal revolutionary Henry II building institutions? Or perhaps the shrewd, pragmatic financial consolidator Henry VII, who valued stability above all else, even if it meant being feared?
A tough question. Where are the wrong, ending up on facing treason charge. Thank you for joining us on